Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Welcome to the mother of all talk shows, the Open University of the Airwaves, where there are no tuition fees and where you are encouraged to speak back to the teacher. For the next 3 hours, we will be touring the world. Not literally, because I'm stuck here in this chair, but we'll be talking to people from all around the world and watched and listened to by people all around the world. Hundreds of thousands of them will be watching all or part of this show. Just under 1 million again last week. This is, without doubt, a show like no other. No other political show in the entire Anglosphere can hold a candle to the reach and importance of this show. And that is as much down to you as it is down to me. The quality from me is axiomatic. The quality of our guests truly outstanding. And the quality of the contributions, especially on the telephone, from you are what make this show different. We're hoping to get back to twice a week very soon, probably by the end of the summer, if we can raise enough money in our fighting fund or get a sponsor for a return of the midweek Moats. We hope to bring back the world record-breaking podcast, which began to break into the charts in virtually every country in the world when we had to sadly discontinue it. But Sunday's mother of all talk shows is here to stay, and it doesn't cost you a penny to watch it. So spread the words. It's on all reputable platforms. On my YouTube channel, please subscribe. On my Facebook, on my Twitter, on my Instagram, on TikTok, on Tumblr, on Twitch, on Getter, every platform. We're affiliated with every respectable platform on the planet. So fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be another exhilarating and occasionally bumpy ride, because this is the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Just about the only words that Joe Biden can now say coherently are the words Putin's price hike, Putin inflation. This way, he hopes to divert the rising tide of anger in the United States of America at the economic disaster which is beginning to overwhelm millions, tens of millions of Americans. His alibi, of course, ignores the fact that the inflation in the United States and its attendant economic problems started long before the invasion of Ukraine by the Russian armed forces on the 24th of February. In fact, a little remembered fact, the problems of the American economy were beginning to mount even before the COVID-19 pandemic and all the economic wreckage that has wrought by the government as well as by the virus itself. Now, an economy that was headed south really dramatically before the pandemic is by definition in a real spot of trouble now. It's not just inflation. Although the $6 gallon of petrol is upon us, here in the United Kingdom, the £2 per litre petrol and diesel is now upon us. At least it will be. I passed one in the middle of the night, not 20 miles from my house, where diesel had reached £1.99.4 pence. So tonight it will undoubtedly cross the £2 mark, even though the price of a barrel of oil is actually lower today than it was in 2009. Go figure how all that can possibly calibrate. Must be to do with futures and hedges and bears and bulls and all the other paraphernalia of the capitalist economic model. We have a crisis in our model, and therefore it seems inescapable to me that we have to start talking about a different model. If this is the best that our system can do, don't we need a new system? But back to Joe Biden for a moment. He has a ticking clock in the corner of the Oval Office, and that clock is set at the midterm elections in November, just a few months from now. At the moment, the so-called Democratic Party controls the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives. And they're getting nothing done. They are achieving less than nothing. They are making every matter worse in the United States with one-party government. Were the Democrats to lose control of the Senate, maybe even of both houses of Congress, this coming November, then Joe Biden will be, by definition, a lame duck president. He will be able to achieve precisely nothing, and all the ill-pronounced, ill-articulated pronunciamento that are being whispered in his ear or written in very large letters on idiot boards in front of him will be of no moment whatsoever. The people who will run the US government will be his enemies in the Republican Party. And 2 years after that, Joe Biden has to stand for re-election. An old, feeble, senile man. A man that you would not trust to send out for a loaf of bread, if he could get a loaf of bread 2 years from now. Will have to run for election, because if it is not him, it'll be somebody even worse than him by the name of Kamala Harris. Unless someone is going to challenge Joe Biden for the Democratic Party's nomination. And that is a distinct possibility. And I believe, and I spoke to a very wise man who's on the show later this evening about that possibility, and he persuaded me that Hillary Clinton has not given up. That even though her and Bill and Barack are really running the show in the White House, she wants it for herself. She cannot bear to be the candidate that was defeated by Donald J. Trump. And why do I labor this point? January 6th. The only reason why the entire American state and its media are trying to crank up like a starting handle on a cold morning the hearings into the so-called insurrection, which would be a rather tame demonstration in central London or the centre of most capitals of most countries on a wet Tuesday, but are now being billed as a civil war act, as an act of treason and insurrection. The reason that they have to talk this matter up is they have to put Donald Trump out of the race. Because if Donald Trump fights Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or Hillary Clinton or any lesser mortal, lesser known mortal at least, then Trump wins hands down. In the latest polling in all of the battleground states, Donald Trump beats all Democratic comers. So the only way to do that is therefore to put him out of the race. And that means to criminalize him, to charge him and convict him. before he has the chance to become President of the United States again. But that would be an act of civil war in itself, an act that would be unlikely to be accepted with equanimity from the scores of millions of Americans that would quite like Donald Trump to be their president again. Are they going to allow some kind of lawfare in the United States, in the Republic, to deprive them of the chance to elect a former president back into the White House? I doubt that very much. So whilst talking interminably about acts that could precipitate civil war, the Democrats almost certainly, in my view, have in mind their only stratagem to create conditions for what could become a real civil war in America. Well, some people would be quite happy to see that happen, but I'm not amongst them. I pray for the stability and progress of the United States of America, as I do all countries. It is not a good thing to have a society as sick in the head as American society currently is. You're probably, if you're not in the United States, still talking about the massacre of 19 children and 2 brave school teachers near the Mexican border, the Ross High School. But that was 22 mass shootings ago. Yes, since that mass shooting, which is fixed in your mind, there have been 22 subsequent mass shootings in America. This is a sick country indeed, not just economically sick, but psychologically sick. And on top of that is the sickness of grandiosity. The sickness of imagining that a country with so many problems of its own must go out around the world creating problems in other people's countries. I've just looked at a headline in the American press this day: Congress divided on how to tackle LGBT rights in China. What do LGBT rights in China have to do with the American Congress? And at least, does the American Congress not have problems closer to home on which it should be focusing? I saw Juan Guaido, remember him? The president of Venezuela, self-appointed, recognized by the United States, given billions of dollars. God knows where that money went. To my surprise, he's still living in Venezuela. And he got into a rumpus by marching into a cafe yesterday. And Antony Blinken took to the rostrum ex cathedra, denouncing people in Venezuela for being mean to a man that they have never elected, but Blinken regards as their president, and is giving them their money with which to pretend that he is the president of Venezuela. American bases everywhere. I just watched John Pilger's Coming War with China, epic, and I mean epic, documentary on Netflix. The United States has 800 military bases around the world, and most of them are surrounding Russia, China, Iran, Venezuela, all the countries that the United States has designated foolishly as its enemies. But the ones surrounding China are about the attempt to blunt, to block, to break the People's Republic of China, almost by definition an unstoppable force. A China that cannot be stopped. The US is burning its money and its political credit around the world in a vain attempt to taunt, to lure China into the same kind of confrontation that they have lured Russia into in the Ukraine, to which I now turn. No sensible military commentator anywhere now any longer denies that Russia has begun a series of decisive victories in the war in Ukraine that will partition the country in the later part of this year. The only argument being where that partition boundary border will be. No serious political commentator, no serious newspaper is any longer pretending, as they were for more than 100 days, that Ukraine was winning the war. Everyone serious now accepts that Ukraine has lost the war, that by my calculation, $75 billion sent to Ukraine has been burned and wasted, except where it's turning up on the dark web at $30,000 a Javelin missile, coming to an airport near you, coming to a bank robbery near you, wherever you are, being purchased on the dark web by terrorists and organized criminal gangs. All of that money, your money, has been wasted. And thousands upon thousands of Ukrainian soldiers have given their lives for nothing in a war that is lost and need never have been fought. All it needed was a pen and Zelensky's signature that Ukraine would not join NATO and would implement the Minsk I and II agreements that he had already signed under the guarantee of Germany and France. And all of those young men in the Ukrainian armed forces would still be alive. How's that for a crime? And that crime too originates in Washington, in the sick society. Lyndon Johnson talked about the great society. Now we have the sick society. But of course, none of America's orders could have been carried out quite so comprehensively if the European leaders had not themselves been spineless satraps of a declining empire run by a sclerotic, gerontocratic 80-year-old man who can't tie his own shoelaces or button up his own dressing gown, in which he wanders the corridors and haunts the lavatories of the White House in Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. And lastly, I turn to my own country, the most enthusiastic of the satraps, the bootlicker of all bootlickers, the once great Britain, led by a mountebank, led by a cad, a bounder, a rascal that even when I entered Parliament, not an aeon ago, but 35 years ago, would have been horse-whipped out of the building on account of his personal conduct, his dishonesty, rank dishonesty on a scale unseen even in the Augean stable of Westminster over the last century or so in London, in the United Kingdom. Our Prime Minister won a vote of confidence amongst his own members of Parliament. Well, I say won, but he won it with such a large number of his own colleagues against him. One has to wonder if he will not go the way of all Tory flesh, having had a vote of confidence falling from power very soon afterwards. More colleagues voted against Boris Johnson than voted against Theresa May, his immediate predecessor, in her vote of confidence. Boris Johnson survived, But will he survive the 2 by-election crushing defeats to which he's headed this very month? Will he survive £2, £2.50 a litre of diesel? Will he survive the coming winter in which our people will be forced to choose between heating and eating? Will he survive the untying or even cutting of the Gordian knot, which is the Northern Ireland Protocol in the ongoing battle with the European Union, which we struggled so mightily to withdraw from, but ended up doing on everything that matters exactly the same things as we would have done if we had remained in the European Union. Talk about an opportunity missed. Johnson had the chance to make a truly independent, truly Great Britain, a world power, with a seat on the Security Council of the United Nations, with a brand name recognized everywhere in the world, with a language which is the lingua franca of commerce, of the internet, of the financial world, and of much of cultural and journalistic and broadcasting discourse, as this show itself proves. But he threw it all away. Boris Johnson has thrown it all away. Joe Biden was dealt a lousy hand and has played it badly. Boris Johnson was dealt the best hand ever from the deck in a century in Britain. And he threw it all away also. We've got some cracking guests coming up, so I've spoken for long enough. As I say, fasten your seatbelts. This is the mother of all talk shows.
Gosh darn, how do you get this thing to work? Is it that one? Is it this one here? Gosh, was this thing built in America? Jeez. Kamala, would you get in here? I can't get the, gosh darn wireless to work.
You know I can't answer questions, Joe, when I'm laughing.
I'm trying to, listen to that Scottish guy on the wireless, the Galloway fella.
Oh, Joe, you're so funny.
I've been pressing this red button on and off and on and off. Heck, I can't get it to work. Hello, Biden residence.
Mr. President, be advised, we have executed the airstrike on Syria. Confirmed.
That's just great. How long until it gets delivered? I'm starving.
Let's take a call. Go ahead, Kenny.
Hi, George. Yeah, I just want to talk about the trans issue that you were speaking about earlier.
Yeah,
I've
go
got a
ahead.
book in front of me by Douglas Murray, and he's got a paragraph here that I'd just like to read out, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was standing on the corner at a quarter.
All right, I'll get him off. He's a nutter. He's a nutter. In the UK, it's 08081 965 522, and in the US, it's +1 844 944 3344.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
By the way, this coming week is the 5th anniversary of the Grenfell Tower crime. I call it a crime, as well as a disaster in which 72 people were incinerated. Gayatri and I visited the scene of the crime just yesterday, and a short video will come up on the hour on Grenfell. May the 72 victims rest in peace if they can. But the community is still seared, still scorched, still traumatized by that disaster and the compounding disaster of the failure to bring to justice the people responsible for it. Should also be remembered in your thoughts and in your prayers. I've got a poll running. Is Donald Trump guilty of setting off the January 6th riots? I say riots, but I mean, by British standards, as I say, it was a rowdy demonstration on a wet Tuesday. But they're building it up as if it were the first shots in a civil war. Is Donald Trump guilty? A, yes. B, no. You can vote on my Twitter feed. You can vote on my YouTube channel. Please subscribe. I'm still this close to getting to 200,000 subscribers, and you can vote on my Telegram channel, which is t.me/George Galloway. And may I say, possibly for the 500th time, I do not send direct messages to anybody on Telegram. If you get a message from anybody claiming to be me, they are an imposter in all circumstances. There are no circumstances in which you will ever get a direct message from me. Caleb Maupin, my favorite American commentator, is a journalist, a broadcaster, a speaker, and an analyst, and an author, and an all-round good egg. And he joins me now, I think, from New York City. Caleb, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. Always a pleasure to see you. I think you were busy. You didn't hear my opening remarks, but I was saying that the only words that Joe Biden can be trusted to say now without stumbling are Putin's price hike and Putin's inflation. Is that nonsense? Cutting any ice, buttering any parsnips?
Of course it's nonsense. I mean, if you look at the facts, prices were rising long before things escalated in Ukraine. In addition to that, the primary driver, on top of the other factors, was the fact that he chose to escalate economic warfare against Russia, make it harder for Russia to export their grain, make it harder for Russia to export food onto the markets, make it harder for Russia to export natural gas. So on top of a situation where we already had a rise in food costs, we already had a rise in energy costs, Joe Biden then chose to use the crisis in Ukraine to compound it and make the situation even worse. And that's on Joe. That's not on Russia. So Russia is a convenient scapegoat for the White House. But at the end of the day, if you look at the economic data, the White House has a lot more complicity and blame on its hands than anything that could be said about Russia. Russia wants to export their grain. Russia wants to export their natural gas. The more natural gas they export, the more money they make. You know, they're not trying to deprive the world of it. They're not trying to deprive the world of grain. It's economic warfare from the United States, compounded by already pre-existing factors, which the Biden administration itself has made worse with their restrictions on drilling, with their issues regarding pushing organic farming, which has a much lower output in terms of crops than regular traditional farming that uses pesticides. The Biden administration has done a lot to make things worse, and now they're blaming it on Russia.
Well, I suppose the question is anybody fooled by Biden's false attribution of the reasons for these problems?
Well, the poll numbers certainly don't say that. I mean, if you look at the poll numbers, Joe Biden is wildly unpopular. You look at those stickers people are putting next to the gas tanks in the United States, the gas, the place that you go and pump your gas. They've got a sticker on there with Joe Biden that says, "I did that." Polls show Joe Biden is wildly unpopular. The only person who's less popular than Joe Biden seems to be Kamala Harris, his vice president, who would become president if he were to step down. So it seems like this is not a good time for the Democrats, and that's why they're beating the drums of the culture war. The Democrats are running on a platform of Roe versus Wade and abortion. They're running on a platform of gun control and gun control legislation. They're running on a platform of remember how bad January 6th was, remember how Donald Trump was. That's all they've got going for them, because so far the Democratic administration in the White House that was supposed to ride in on a white horse and save the day has been an utter disaster for the country in terms of living standards, in terms of dealing with COVID. Things have just objectively gotten worse in the United States, and everyone can see that.
Your comparison of the disastrous poll ratings of Joe Biden and the even worse of Kamala Harris reminded me of an old Private Eye cover back in the 1970s when Richard Nixon was standing behind Richard Nixon was Spyro Agnew, and Nixon is pointing at him, and in the speech bubble it says, "Nobody's going to shoot me with this guy next in line." And I suppose Biden, having the only person more unpopular than him as vice president, probably inures him, short of going completely gaga or, God forbid, passing away in the night, assures him of the remainder of this term. But isn't the reason why they're hyping up January 6th and the hearings because they may need to criminalize Donald Trump, convict him, and legally, through warfare, lawfare, keep him out of the next presidential race?
Oh, sure. And, to be fair, George, a lot of Americans do have questions about January 6th, but their questions aren't how bad is Donald Trump? Their questions are how was this allowed to happen? I've been at many protests in Washington, D.C. in my lifetime. And one thing I can guarantee you could not have ever happened at those protests was walking into the U.S. Capitol. I was, marching against the Iraq War when I was a teenager with hundreds of thousands of people. And there were so many guards around that Capitol building. I mean, you couldn't get close to it. So how is it that on January 6th, we understand that the doors were left open or simply, we had a situation where this crowd was able to force their way into the halls of Congress. Now, I have questions about how that happened. I doubt those questions are going to be answered in these congressional charades that we're about to see. This is going to be a lot of theater, a lot of bombast, a lot of, scare stories about how bad the Republicans are. But they're not answering real questions about how the Capitol Police and how the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security that we know had heavily infiltrated the QAnon circles, the Proud Boys and other groups, how did they allow this to happen? I think there's fair questions there. Americans want answers to that. They're not going to get them. It's interesting that you made reference to Richard Nixon, because one thing that Richard Nixon did when he was president is he did his famous Nixon shocks. In response to an economic downturn, he took the USA off the gold standard, but he also imposed a wage and price freeze in response to inflation. To stop inflation, he froze the prices so that the prices of food that American working families were having to pay for, they would freeze. In order to protect working families, he did impose a price freeze. Now, I don't see the Biden administration even talking about doing this. A price freeze might actually improve things. They're not talking about it. They're just blaming Russia. And it's wild because Richard Nixon was a extreme conservative, a Republican. He viciously went after the Black Panthers and the Black Freedom Movement. He escalated the Vietnam War and bombed and killed lots of people. But Richard Nixon, to his credit, he did advocate a guaranteed minimum income for all families in the United States. And well into his administration, even in his second term, he was saying that he still believed that Americans with children should get what would be the equivalent of roughly $10,000, in a payment today. No questions asked. If you had children, you should get a payment. So as a conservative, even Richard Nixon was advocating more of a welfare state than the Democrats advocate today. Nixon's the guy who created the Environmental Protection Agency. And Nixon also is the guy who opened U.S. relations with China by going and sitting down with Mao. So even though Nixon was a hardline conservative, he was far, far to the left of anything in the Democratic Party today, especially on issues of economics.
That is extraordinary. And he also, along with Kissinger, spent a lot of time trying to keep China and Russia as far apart from each other as it was possible to do. Whereas subsequent presidents, including this one, have done everything they could to push Russia and China as close together as it's possible for them to be, which is a segue into the war in Ukraine, if you like. I said in my monologue that now no serious analyst or newspaper or military buff any longer pretends that Ukraine is winning this war. Even the Guardian conceded this week that the massive casualty numbers in the Ukrainian armed forces of perhaps up to 1,000 dead a day in the Ukrainian armed forces is tipping the war. A tipping point has now been passed in the war. Is that in any way beginning to be represented amongst the talking heads on the sofas on Sunday morning TV in America?
Well, we've seen the New York Times admit that the Ukrainian military is not sharing intelligence with the United States like the United States would like. We also have some subtle acknowledgement on the liberal side that, on the one hand, driving Russia out of every bit of territory Ukraine claims is not realistic. And on the other hand, there are a lot of questions about all these weapons and all this money that's being poured into Ukraine by the United States. And we're seeing weapons available on the black market. They're turning up for sale. We see U.S.-made weapons that, instead of going into the hands of fighters, are going directly onto the black market and into the hands of criminal elements that are selling them online, etc. And we had Rand Paul, the Republican senator from Kentucky, as well as Elizabeth Warren, the Democratic senator from Massachusetts, calling for an inspector general to look into where these weapons are going to, because so many questions are being asked. So within the establishment, I think there is an understanding that the Biden administration policy of keeping this war going as long as possible doesn't seem to really pay off for the United States. It's wrecking the U.S. economy, and Russia is not going to surrender. But that said, you have to point to the most obvious part of the hypocrisy of this, which is that at the end of the day, they don't care about Ukrainians. They're waving the Ukrainian flags and they're saying, oh, we care about those poor Ukrainians. If you care about the Ukrainians, why are you not wanting to end this war? Why are you not pushing for negotiations to end the fighting? They are trying to prolong this war. They talk of no-fly zones. Every politician is trying to beat the drums of war harder than every other, trying to one-up themselves and how much they want to escalate this. If you care about Ukrainian lives, that's not how you would act. If you care about Ukrainian lives, you would want to negotiate. And that is not what U.S. leaders are doing. So all of their claims to care about the Ukrainian people are very cynical. They don't care about the Ukrainian people. They want to fight with Russia. This is, the Afghan trap. Once again, they're trying to draw Russia into a long-term conflict in Ukraine. They want, to bog down Russia, to cause problems for Russia's economy. That's what they're looking to do here. They want this to become a long-term conflict. And we know now, thanks to Yahoo News and other revelations, that the CIA has been in Ukraine for the past 5 years plotting to turn this country into a battlefield. Now, if you're plotting to turn someone's country into a battlefield, if you're plotting to have a long-term proxy war in a country, that shows you don't care about the people there. That's not love for the Ukrainian people, and we shouldn't let them get away with this hypocrisy.
Caleb Maupin, as always, a pleasure to talk to you on the mother of all talk shows. Thanks for joining us. Is Donald Trump guilty of setting off the January 6 riots? A, yes, 36% on Twitter. B, no, 64% on Twitter. On YouTube, 37% yes, 63% no. On Telegram, only 29% yes, 71% no. So, if the Democrats are hoping that their last remaining hope of progress, or at least holding the line on the November election day in the midterms, their only hope of staving off the return of Donald Trump, which would be the greatest return since Lazarus rose from the grave. If January 6th is their only hope, then on the basis of the votes flowing in here, they've got another hope coming. So get voting on my Twitter, on my YouTube channel. Please subscribe. On my Telegram channel, please subscribe. Now, as I told you, you can help our fighting fund to get our Wednesday show back on the air. If you are among those, and I know that there are many, because the audience figures for a Wednesday night were not that far behind the audience figures for a Sunday night. So clearly there was an appetite for a midweek mother of all talk shows. If you want to help us get that show back on the air, go to the super chat function on YouTube. You can donate in any currency, and if you donate more than a tenner, I'll read out your message on the show. Let me take a very brief break and I'll be right back.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As vicious as the Twitter sphere, where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Sean Bebbington in England sends £6 Sean, many thanks to you. Dino Pantelucas sends $4.99, which is his weekly contribution. Dino, thank you very much indeed. He sends his solidarity from New York City. Now, the phone numbers are these. If you're in the United Kingdom, it's 08 081 96 5522. That's 08 081 96 5522. You call us, we call you back, and it doesn't cost you a penny. And if you're in the United States or Canada, it's also toll-free, costs you nothing at all. It's +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. Or you can email us anytime at onair@moats.tv. And of course, you can send your tweets. But let's go to the phone lines. The first train is to Clarksville, and it's my old friend Richard. Richard, welcome back.
Thank you, George. Thanks for the opportunity to talk. Caleb Maupin, who I like very much as you do, mentioned a lot of my points, but what I'm really outraged about is why did mainly the Democrats doing the January 6th hearings, why did they have to wait 2 years? And of course I know the answer to that, but that outrages me. There was so much momentum after January 6, 2020, when the event actually happened, and so much of it is dissipated. And of course we know it is for the upcoming 2022 midterm elections. And Caleb was exactly right. The Democrats, they could talk about Medicare for all, industrial policy. No, they have to talk about January 6th, abortion, scare everybody that they're going to lose their abortion rights, And it seems like, grimly, the school shootings play right into the Democrats' hands. Then they can talk. They never do anything, but they can talk about gun control. So why is it taking 2 years?
Well, you can't make you can't make a souffle rise twice, as Mrs. Thatcher famously said, and I'm not sure that the January 6th souffle will rise sufficiently to protect the Democratic majority in the midterm elections. And that was the risk they ran by delaying them for so long. But they're behind the 8 ball, to mix my metaphors, across the Atlantic. What else can they do? They can talk about abortion, but there are plenty of people in the United States are not wild about the subject of abortion, and for many people in the United States, it isn't an issue at all. They can talk about gun rights and the taking away of people's weapons, but there are scores of millions of people in the United States that don't want their weapons taken away. So these are double-edged, these weapons, aren't they?
Yes, but one thing that these issues do is they help fundraise to the people who are passionate, to the donor class. So maybe the Democrats are just happy with that.
Good point.
To get money. But, another point I'd like to make, George, is I wish people could have a longer view of history. So many people on the Ukrainian-Russian situation think history started like 6 months ago, 9 months ago. And, of course, you pointed out that, it goes back to 2014 when we had a coup. Well, doesn't it go back to 1989 and the winning the Cold War? But we could not accept victory. We had to continue having enemies to keep funding the defense contracts and keep making the weapons.
Exactly. We couldn't take yes for an answer. Yeah. Richard in Clarksville, as always, a pleasure hearing your wisdom. Let's stay in the United States, go to Minneapolis, where another good friend, Michael, is on the line. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, George. Good to talk to you again. Thanks for having me on.
And you, bro.
So, I'm pretty hacked off today, which has, I guess, been a common theme the last couple of weeks. But we are now at a point where inflation in the United States is the highest it's been since the height of World War II. Gas costs an average of $5 a gallon. That's about $5 where I am in Minneapolis. But in places like, Southern California, New York, it's significantly more expensive than that. George, I read that it's one of those things where it confirms my own lived experience. I read that the average American is paying $400 more per month for groceries than they were before this inflationary spike. And then, George, I have a better job. I'm blessed. I have a better job than most. And even I am losing money at work. And then I look and I read the news, and Joe Biden just last night said that U.S. inflation could last for a while and that it'll eventually come down, but we're just going to have to live with it for a while. And I'll tell you, George, I don't know how much longer I can live with it. I'm really struggling, and I know a lot of Americans are making a lot less money than I am who are struggling even more so. So this is a total disaster. But I'm not surprised because, we had infants in this country, babies who couldn't get baby formula, who were on the verge of starving for 4 months before Joe Biden was willing to grudgingly use the Defense Production Act. So they could institute price controls. They could bring the price of food down. They could bring the price of gas down, but they're not willing to do it. So I ask you, George, how much longer can the American people take that? And what are we supposed to do when the President of the United States is shrugging his shoulders saying, hey, I know things have gotten too expensive to live, but tough luck? What are we supposed to do, George? Tell me.
Well, as Caleb pointed out, I didn't know this myself, Michael, and I'm quite a bit older than Caleb, that Richard Nixon introduced a wage and price freeze in the United States to blunt and halt an earlier 1970s inflationary spiral. I didn't know that. But the fact that Nixon did it, but it's inconceivable that the Democratic Party would even give consideration to such a measure. Witness their pitiful performance over the baby formula tragedy, as it turned out to be. It's amazing how far the center of political gravity has moved over the last decades. Thanks, Michael. Let's stay in the United States, go to New York, where rather mysteriously, somebody called E is on the line about Donald Trump. Go ahead, E.
Salubrious night, George. It's actually Erebos, but I couldn't get that out the last time. Let me just first say that I wish.
Okay.
Let me just say firstly that I wish you and your loved ones health, long life, and safety. Now,
thank you so much, brother. I appreciate that very
absolutely.
much. This is our 10th wedding anniversary, by the way.
Yes,
so,
I saw the pictures.
10 years and 3 lovely children, yeah. Thanks for that.
I saw the
Appreciate
pictures. Gayatri is very talented. I know you didn't take them. The 14th,
right.
The 14th Amendment, Section 3 of the U.S. Constitution allows a majority of, like the majority they have now, like they've had for the past 2 years, to remove Donald Trump for acts or, sedition, insurrection. And they can do that with a simple majority. They don't need, the 60 senators. They don't need any of that. The reality is they need Donald Trump. Right? They need him as a foil. They need him as the boogeyman. They need him. That's why they had 2 failed impeachments. Right? Both of them were never going anywhere. Right? So Trump is the villain that they need to hide behind their failures. And I just wanted to express that because I didn't know if any other caller would come or they would remember that, because this was a conversation, after the second impeachment, which was a failure, and they walked away from it. Pelosi, they wanted nothing to do with it. And then it was pretty clear when you saw the game that they need Trump more than he needs them. So I just wanted to express that to you. And
well, look, Erebus, I feel what you're saying. I feel you, and there's merit in it. There's no doubt that the existence of Donald Trump rallies the troops of the Democratic Party faithful. There's no doubt that the danger of Donald Trump empties the pocketbooks of Democratic Party donors. There's no doubt that he sells newspapers. He brings bums onto seats in front of television sets, that the political news and so on, and Twitter, for example, are all poorer for his departure, in that sense that things are much less interesting without Trump. And I get that. But surely the very real and present danger exists of Trump winning the presidency back again. And that's something they surely don't want.
Knowing how craven and, how manipulative the Democrats are, they're not too low for anything, because even when they lose, they get to fundraise in the losing position, right? So they get to talk about they have 2 years, 4 years, and say, we tried to do something for all of you, and it's a cycle. It's the ratchet effect. So the Republicans come in and they turn everything to the right, and then the Democrats come in and keep it there, right? Just like the way a ratchet works. So it's a game, and we're hoping to get
Very
Jimmy
good,
Dole.
brother.
We're hoping to get Jimmy Dole as president, but we don't know about it yet.
I'd certainly be one of his voters and campaigners and donors if that was legal to do so. No, they're not too low. They're so low they could crawl under a rattlesnake wearing a top hat. Thanks for that. Let's go to Tallahassee. Who wouldn't want to? Where Jim is on the line on Ukraine. Go ahead, Jim. What would you like to say?
Hi, George. It's wonderful to be back on the show, and I wish
Have
you.
we lost Jim?
I wish you joy. and I wish you many, many more.
Well,
sir.
look, coming up on the hour, we've got the Grenfell 5th anniversary video that Gayatri and I made just yesterday, just her and me and a mobile telephone. But I think we captured the central importance of this catastrophe that happened in a place that we used to live, where our children went to school, and where we smelt the death and destruction for a very long time afterwards. The poll is doing great numbers. Is Donald Trump guilty of setting off January 6 riots? And if the Democrats are hoping for a big yes, they're in for a disappointment. It's on Twitter, yes 36, no 64. YouTube, yes 37, no 63. Telegram, yes 28, no 72. You can still vote for another hour or so on that. The phone numbers to join the show, we seem to have a problem with the line to Tallahassee, but elsewhere in the UK, it's 08081965522, and if you're in the United States, it's +1 844 944 3344. Gary Main donated £2 and says, "Gives a shout, take a shout, Gary Main." Thank you for your kind donation. Now, I said I would read out some Telegram messages for Gayatri, but I see that I have done that. So I don't know, I'm speaking to the director now, if you can still hear me. But if you can, I think maybe 2 minutes early, we'll throw to the video on Grenfell. As I say, I lived there with my wife and children. Our children went to school there. I was a school governor there. My wife had a shop there. We were right at the heart of a community that was exactly almost to the day 5 years ago ripped apart, traumatized, and a trauma that has never healed. Not just because of the scale of the disaster, not just because you have to look at the tower block every time you step out onto the street and remember what happened there, not just because of the grief of knowing people who perished that terrible death there, but the trauma of knowing that no one has been held to account for it, and that tens of thousands of people in tower blocks, just like Grenfell, are still in as much risk of another Grenfell inferno as they were before this one happened. Let me throw to that, if the mothership can hear me. This was me and Gayatri's very short 5-minute documentary on Grenfell anniversary weekend. Almost exactly 5 years ago, Grenfell behind me was a towering inferno. 72 innocent souls perished in a fire that blazed throughout the night. The brave firefighters, poorly resourced, in some ways poorly led, were left up a tall building without a ladder, at least a ladder that would reach to the top of the building. 72 innocent souls, men, women, and children, were incinerated in this inferno. We lived very nearby at the time, and for many weeks, even months afterwards, you could still smell the incineration. It was easy to imagine the demise that had been suffered by those 72 people. It's in the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, a tale of two cities, as so much of Britain is. Some of the richest people in the world live in the Royal Borough, and some of the poorest also. And the poorest of those lived in tower blocks like this one, improperly clad, indeed dangerously clad, perilously, fatally, dangerously clad, with no proper fire exits, with no proper ability of the fire brigade to fight a fire such as the one that they encountered. As a matter of fact, the London Fire Brigade and its firemen and firewomen, firefighters, all are heroes of this story, although some people tried to turn them into villains, because of course after the great crime that was the Grenfell Tower Inferno, there had to be scapegoats sought, and they couldn't be in the government, could they? I'm not making a party political point, because the relaxation of the regulations that used to apply to cladding and fire safety had been abandoned, first of all, by the Blair and Brown Labour government, but of course continued enthusiastically by the cost-cutting, deregulating, privatising Conservative Liberal Democrat coalition and the Tory government that followed it. The truth is that the entire community remains traumatised, as you can see from the posters and banners around this site, ever since that tragedy, because there has been no justice. Everybody in Britain knows about the Grenfell Tower Inferno, but most people don't know that its victims still have not properly received justice, and its villains, the villains of the piece, who put the improper cladding on, who put the dangerous, toxic, highly flammable cladding on, are still not on trial. Moreover, the government, which declared that it would make sure that Grenfell never happened again, even though it had happened several times before, have still not done what they promised to do. Michael Gove, the government minister responsible, was on the radio on Friday saying that the progress in proper cladding, proper fire safety for 10,000 buildings like this one, 10,000 like this one, with thousands and thousands of people living in them, had been far too slow. Well, whose fault was that, Michael? Your government has been in power throughout the time that this progress has been painfully slow. He says on the 5th anniversary that thankfully progress is now beginning to accelerate. Why didn't it accelerate from the first moment? Why have all these thousands of people had their lives put at risk, like the 72 that perished here? Why weren't they made safe long before now? The truth is, it was cost-cutting and deregulating and privatizing that led to this tragedy. It was the encamping of poor people in dangerous buildings that led to this tragedy. It was the tale of two cities, Britain, that led to this tragedy. We lived here. My children went to school here. I was a school governor here. My wife had a shop here. We feel still, 5 years on, a part of this community. And you see that heart on the sign behind me? That heart remains broken. Rest in peace, if you can, the victims of the Grenfell disaster, the Grenfell crime. It's going to be a somber week for those living in our former area around North Kensington, and my thoughts and prayers will be with all of the victims and the whole community, which is still not fully recovered from that awful night 5 years ago. Now, Jim in Tallahassee was there all along, It was me that had pulled the plug out of my earphone. I'm getting a bit Joe Biden-esque in this. Jim in Tallahassee, my sincere apologies. Please repeat what it was you were saying into the ether.
Sure. My question was really about your viewpoint. I personally see a connection, in fact, a direct connection between the, how should we put this, the U.S. adventurism in the Ukraine, connecting that with the actual current and foreseeable into the future nosedive of the U.S. dollar, the petrodollar. That was question number one. I love the fact that you had Mr. Maupin on. He's got a wonderful viewpoint. Also, I was going to ask about what you think of the given the horrendous crumbling of the United States military empire. What do you think the odds might be that there would be discovered more United States run or funded bioweapons labs in places not just within the Ukraine, where apparently the Russian army has claimed they found already 32 of them, but how many other places? We have to ask the question then, how many other places does the United States have such things? And my point being that the resources of all of these places are being carefully siphoned towards a small group of people, most of whom are corporate heads in the United States. But how about the fact that since we have now encouraged Russia and China and to a lesser extent India, other countries, into saying, fine, we're not going to sell you our oil in dollars anymore, when after all that was the petrodollar. If they're not going to do that anymore, there really isn't any foundation for the dollar itself, is there? And what would be your views on that?
If that were to be lost, there would be no foundation for the dollar. The United States is a tremendously indebted country. Its main source of that debt is to China, of all places. So the United States' fundamentals in its economy are exceedingly shaky. The dollar was for a long time king and isn't dead yet, let's be clear. The dollar is strong, but the dollar being strong is hurting the American economy, not helping it, whilst the ruble being strong is helping the Russian economy rather than harming it. But the dollar is still the main reserve currency. But its days are clearly numbered. They may be numbered in a large number of days, but they are on the countdown because undoubtedly Russia and China, who have effectively become, to many extents and purposes, one country, are not going to trade with each other using American dollars. That would be ridiculous. So they're going to more and more trade with each other. If Russia is selling wheat and oil and gas to India, why would either of those two countries want to do it in American dollars? Ditto Iran and Venezuela, that just signed a new 20-year economic agreement, 20 years of cooperation, collaboration, now stretching out ahead of those. Why would those two countries, even if they could, trade with each other in US dollars? And if it's true, and it may not be, but on the other hand it may be, that Saudi Arabia itself is sufficiently lacking in confidence in the long-term fundamentals of the United States that it is prepared to sell oil to China in Chinese currency rather than in dollars, then definitely the beginning of the end is, if not visible, discernible, hoving into view. the days of the dollar being king are therefore definitely numbered. Now, on the biolabs, I'm among those because I'm not a conspiracy theory buff, and a lot of conspiracy theory people don't like me. I would have regarded the biolabs issue as a classic tinfoil hat conspiracy theory par excellence, but it's turned out to be absolutely true, as nowadays so many of these conspiracy theories are turning out to be absolutely true. You say the Russians have found 32. The Americans have acknowledged that there were 46 biolabs in Ukraine. 46. Run by the Pentagon, that well-known purveyor of health. And yet the Pentagon want you to believe that they funded 46 biolabs in Ukraine for health reasons. Well, if anyone is stupid enough to believe that, I have a bridge here in London. I could sell them very, very cheap indeed. And you're right. If there's 46 of them in Ukraine on Russia's border, where else are these biolabs in profusion? And more importantly, what exactly is it that they are doing in these biolabs? Great call, Jim. Thanks for the opportunity to give the answers that I have given. Super chats. Kyle Willie, $10. Thanks, Kyle. Ray Bob, US dollars, $10. I love this channel and I love this community. All of you are amazing. Thank you, Ray. My good friend Ian Puddock, purveyor of the finest gin. What would I know about gin? But I'm told it's the finest gin. It's certainly bought by some of the top people in Britain. Ian Puddock sends £44.99. God bless you, Ian. Otto Calvo, in Norwegian currency, yes, Norwegian krona, 10 crowns. Thank you, Otto, I appreciate it. LW Paradis, US dollars 2. George, looks like Mélenchon did it. Please comment. Can someone get me the French results? I'll be a happy man if true. I don't know why the editor didn't tell me that the French election was today. Well, one last plug. My novel, Queensway, has been now succeeded by its sequel, Black Lake. Both of them are available. You might get a facsimile up on the screen now. There you go. There's Queensway. Presupposes that Hitler made it across the Channel and into Whitehall. And Black Lake, which is, I suppose, a continuation of the counterfactual history that Britain was occupied and some people collaborated with the fascist regime. But some, and an increasing number of people, fought back in the British resistance. They're only £8.99 for both of them. It's a good read. It's a good gift. I know that because people tell it me all the time. So it's £8.99 plus postage, of course, and you can get them from my shop. The details are there on the screen. Now it says here that my next guest, Joe Lauria, is an investigative journalist. Well, that's like saying that Cristiano Ronaldo is a footballer. Cristiano Ronaldo is the greatest footballer of all time, and Joe Lauria is the investigative journalist. He was formerly with outfits like the Sunday Times, like the Wall Street Journal, I think like the Washington Post, but he is now the editor-in-chief of a site which I visit every single day. Consortium News is the outfit, and Joe Lauria is its editor-in-chief. And he joins me now. I'm very glad to say for the second time in 2 days. Joe, great to see you again. Thanks for joining us. I had a talk with Caleb Maupin earlier about the political situation in the United States. I might get your views on that later in this interview. But let's start with the war. It is my contention that no longer is there a serious military or political analyst in Western countries any longer able to claim that Ukraine are winning the war. Is that what you think also?
Well, George, as we discussed yesterday, the coverage of the war has declined dramatically, and it's accompanied by more and more voices in the West, led maybe by Henry Kissinger, of all people, and by various columnists in British and American newspapers, and the news itself that is no longer pushing as strongly the idea that Ukraine is winning the war. They haven't dropped the idea that Ukraine could still win it. That's the idea behind all of these enormous amounts of weapons, or at least the money that's been allocated in the United States. Billions, $50 billion or more to Ukraine for weapons and other aid. The idea of still pushing Russia out, not only of what territory they've gained since the February 24 invasion, but also to vacate Crimea and all of Donbass. And that would be a massive task and could risk a nuclear exchange, frankly, between NATO and Russia. If it got to that, it's unlikely that they will be able to do that in Crimea. So I think you're right. I think I shy away from reporting in our publication from events on the ground day to day because it's very difficult to believe either side. When both sides say something, I think that's probably true. Like when that Black Sea ship was sunk, the Ukrainians said they sunk it. Then the Russians said it sank. I knew it sank. Then the Ukrainians said they used missiles, and the Russians said it was an accident. So I'm back to square one, not knowing exactly what happened there. But yes, you have to look at the Western media to see if they're shifting about the idea that Russia was losing and that Ukraine's winning. And there has definitely been this shift in the last few weeks. That's new.
So in that case, all of this expenditure from the US alone, $50 billion, you add in the others, you're closer to $75 billion worth of aid. All of that has therefore been wasted. It's fallen into Russian hands. It's been destroyed, or it's now on the dark web, where you can buy a Javelin missile for $30,000, coming in the hands of a terrorist to an airport near you, coming in the hands of a criminal to a bank robbery near you. But the damage to our own economies by the economic warfare which we have launched against Russia, that all of this has been for naught, less than naught. That therefore begs the question, are we ruled by idiots?
Not sure. It might be so. They're looking at short-term, what they thought would be a short-term goal, the ultimate goal here. And Joe Biden spelled it out on at least two occasions, not only in Warsaw in that speech, but in the February 24 press conference when he was asked why would new sanctions do anything when they didn't deter the invasion. He said the sanctions were never about the invasion. It was about getting the Russian people to rise up and to see what he has done. So it's about overthrowing Putin. And I think that they thought, although I understand the Treasury, the U.S. Treasury tried to tell the Biden administration not to sanction the Russian central bank. I don't know if that's true, but I've heard that. So there were probably some discussions in the U.S., but they settled on the idea of these massive sanctions, which would not have been possible without the invasion. And I firmly believe the U.S. set a trap for Russia. They wanted them to invade so they could launch this economic war, the information war, which they could take down various channels that they always wanted to take down, like RT America, for example, and to move on to a disinformation board to try to attack private, dissident, small media such as Consortium News and others. They should have foreseen that, yes, the ruble kind of collapsed within the first 2 weeks, but now it's one of the strongest currencies in the world, I understand. It's the Russian central bank has had to take measures to weaken it because it's gotten too strong. So Russia has found with China and India and other countries that are not going along with the Russian sanctions, they're creating a whole new system, a commercial system, a monetary system, a financial system that has split the world in two, and the United States and West have kind of cut their noses off trying to spite their face. And is certainly boomeranged. Anybody, any consumer in Britain or the United States or Western Europe can feel it, whether they blame Putin or not. Yes, the invasion was necessary for the sanctions, and the sanctions is what has caused, when you cut off all of this economic activity from Russia, trade, particularly fertilizer, agricultural goods, and coal, and whatever else you're going to try to show off from Russia, that's going to hurt the West more than Russia. They're sufficient in fuel and food. Those are the two basic things you need to survive as a nation, where a lot of Western countries are dependent on others, on Russia to some extent as well. Joining with China, the whole world is not behind this sanctions regime, and the West is being hurt. Are they idiots? You know, you would think that they wouldn't be idiots if they were in the positions they're in, but they certainly haven't thought it out very clearly, because they're suffering. Again, maybe they're doing that thinking that it would bring Putin down, but so far it has not.
It has not. It looks unlikely to do so, and therefore it was an exceedingly bad call that the Western leaders have made. And the only question then is, are the public in Western countries idiots and going to allow people who make a call that bad to continue in office with renewed mandates and so on? But maybe on another occasion we can look more deeply at that. I want to take you where you were headed in that last answer. It is staggering in a way, but nonetheless a truism, that when people in your country and mine talk about the world, they're really talking about us. They're really talking about what they call the West, although there are plenty of people in the West who are suffering from all of this and who never agreed to it in the first place. But even if you included the population of the whole West, North America, the European countries, and Australia, you are talking about tops 15% of the world's population. The other 85% of the world's population, Africa, Latin America, Asia, the Middle East, the Russia and China, Thailand and Indonesia. I mean, I could go on. 85% of the people of the world live there, not here. How can we shake ourselves of what seems to be an irremediable problem of imagining that the world is us?
Well, you said that Western leaders think that the world is us. I think that they think it's them. In other words, the Western leaders, not even the people of the West. It's really their own interests. To overcome that, which you've asked George, would mean overcoming centuries of historical thinking about the role of the West in the world and in world history. And that goes back to the beginnings of the first Western empires in the 1600s or even early in the 1400s. Africa, Latin America, and then Asia. And the West, ultimately led most predominantly by Britain, dominated the entire world. And the world is still recovering very much from that. And one reason is that because colonialism really didn't completely end, did it? Yes, they lowered the flags in all these countries and put up a national flag, but the economic system, the military relationship, intelligence, they have not stopped meddling and keeping an eye. The Francophone countries, you see French troops in the Sahel, going into Africa all the time. Britain is involved around the world with their intelligence services. The United States has bases all over the globe. And they talk about imperialism in other countries. The U.S. has bases in over 180 countries. It's going to take a long time to overcome a sense of the people who are in power with these kinds of military bases that they are the center of the world still. But 30 years or more has passed them. There was a non-aligned movement from the 1950s with Tito and NASA and Suharto. And this movement is gotten new life again, by the way, after the Russian invasion and the U.S. sanctions against Russia and the BRICS came around in the 90s, and the West has always had an arrogant attitude towards these groups, and I think that history is passing them by. They don't recognize, they being the leaders of the West, the United States primarily, don't see that China is not the China of 30 years ago, and Russia is not the Russia of the Yeltsin age. China is soon to be the most powerful economic country in the entire world, if it isn't already. And the United States, of course, knows they're in a competition with that, but psychologically, they still think they're superior. There's a kind of racial aspect to this, without question, and even within the white race, the Anglo-Saxon sphere is the one that really has the power. When you see the way France was treated with the Australian submarine deal and whatnot, they are grasping onto the last vestiges of that power that they had. I mean, the British Empire and the follow-on American Empire, which run jointly, basically, with Britain. They will not grasp that the power they once had is slipping them by, mostly because of the rise of those other countries that they once ruled, China being predominantly the one, and India, now a huge country with a huge middle class as it never had before. They want to continue to live in that space where they were the power that ran the world, and it's going to take a lot to dislodge that. And we may be seeing the very beginnings of not this change, as it for decades now, maybe in the West, that it's slipping if they realize that their economic war against Russia has failed, especially because of what we're saying, because the former colonial countries are not joining with the West against Russia. They are trading with Russia. They are accepting Russian goods. They're helping Russia survive this economic war, predominantly, again, China doing that, but also India and Africa and Latin America. They've got to wake up and realize they must be one player amongst many in the world and not the predominant power. When you look at the Pentagon and their global dominance documents, where they still say that there should be nobody in the world should challenge United States supremacy. This goes back to Brzezinski, to the Project for New American Century. This thinking exists in the Biden administration. Clearly, Biden comes out of that old era. We're going to need a whole new generation of politicians in the United States and Europe. I don't see them on the horizon, but it's got to come. They've got to realize the world has changed, and the U.S. and Europe can survive in it very well if they just cooperate with other countries and don't try to be the top dog anymore, which they are clearly not. At least they're losing it. They have only military power left. And that's a recipe for very dangerous times if the U.S. feels they need to exercise that power to maintain the fiction that they have, that they're still running the entire world, or that they deserve to anyway.
I didn't interrupt that long answer because it's amongst the best answers I've ever heard. If I could put it in a tin, I'd distribute it across the world. Joe, finally, tell us how people can follow your work, which is, as I said earlier, literally peerless. How do people follow Consortium News?
Well, very simply go to Consortium News, one word, or consortiumnews.com. consortiumnews.com. It was begun in 1997 by Robert Perry. We're still going strong 27 years later. Thank you, George, very much for having me on your show.
You're a gentleman and a scholar. Thanks, Joe Lauria, for that. Some super chats I need to read. Martin McWilliams gives £2. Thank you, Martin. Marcus Brennan, €10. Thank you, Marcus. Keep going, says Marcus. Never let them get you down. Great truth-seeking. Top darts from Dublin. Thank you, my dear friend. And Stephen Dixon says £2. Thank you, George. From me in Dumfries and Galloway, my old stamping ground, my own stamping ground. Thank you, Stephen. Tomas gives €5. I deactivated my Twitter account today, George. The censorship is really getting worse. That's why I'll donate weekly to keep you going. Tomas, thank you very much indeed. I'll have a thing or two to say about Twitter in the rest of the show, but first I need to take a break. Thanks. Professor Richard Wolff said that there are mass shootings in the United States every other week. I didn't have the heart to tell him that in fact there are 1.63 mass shootings in the United States per day. They're not all, of course, as utterly catastrophic as the one in the Ross Primary School, these murderous weapons, which went on to kill, slaughter actually, 19 children of the same age as my own, and 2 brave teachers slain with them. A lot of people in the US want to talk about it.
I read a sobering stat that kind of puts it all into context, and that is that more children in the United States die of gunfire every year than all of the military personnel in the United States and the police combined.
The cops waited for a skeleton key to open the classroom door whilst the children were being murdered inside. I'm sure I've seen American cops kicking down people's doors. They stood waiting rather than deal with the matter themselves.
All police officers have an automatic skeleton key in their trunk, or at least it used to be that way, which was a 12-gauge shotgun which will open any lock. So yes, they could have easily gone in there and not waited for the FBI.
The United States was born a revolutionary country. It came to power through armed revolution. It knew very well to its cost what tyrannical government, in this case from London, looked and felt like, that they would at least be able to defend themselves. Now that right to bear arms is sacred to millions of Americans.
You're there alone in the home sometime at night with the wife, the kids, and there's some bump in the night, and you feel better with everybody huddled behind a bunch of furniture, and you're there with a bead on the door. You know what I mean? And that's what a lot of people, gun sales are through the roof here.
Yes.
They're through the roof because of that. Most people aren't buying AR-15s, but the people are buying for self-defense. They don't trust law enforcement. They don't really trust the government, and they're kind of scared of their neighbors.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, that was just one little vignette, a glimpse at the quality of the calls and conversations that happen here every week on the mother of all talk shows. It truly is a high-ranking, a red brick, a world-class Open University of the airwaves. Thanks to you as much as to our guests. Joe Lauria there was pure poetry, and even the prose parts were classics. The poll is Donald Trump guilty on the January 6 riots. Yes 37, yes 37, yes 28 across Twitter, YouTube and Telegram. No 63, 63 and 72 across the same 3 platforms. Let's go now to my good wife, 10 years wed, Gayatri. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Hello, good evening. I want to read out a tweet from John Key Inglisi, who says, President Putin, thank you for saving the world from USA and the UK white Anglo-Saxon Neanderthals. G. Wolf says, the swamp will do anything to hold on to power. Trump showed us how deep the swamp really is and how it affects the world, not only the US.
Well, yeah, I hear people say that, Gayatri, and of course it is wittingly and unwittingly true, but he didn't do anything about it. As a matter of fact, he appointed the creatures of the swamp, like Bolton, to sit at his right hand and sabotage anything good that he was supposedly trying to do. Sorry to interrupt you.
Well, no, I'll just continue on, by reading out Mary Frances McCarthy Baxfield, who is a big supporter of Trump, arguing that it was not an insurrection, the 6th of January. Trump did not cause the bad elements that broke into and allowed all the bad elements into the Capitol. It was all set up. And then she continues by saying that there would not have been a Russian invasion of Ukraine if Trump was in charge. That we do.
On that latter point, she's probably right. And most of them that ended up in the Capitol building didn't have to break into it. The doors were open, and the staff in the building allowed the crowd to enter. So I think Caleb Maupin is right. There are many questions about January 6th, but many of those questions have to be asked of the Democrats who are now staging these insurrection hearings. It was not an insurrection. America was not subject to a challenge to state power. There was not dual power, not for a second, in the United States. It's theater, it's political theater, and its timing is also theatrical. And I think they've made a mistake with the timing. They should have done this right away, not waited 2 years to do it. Go on, please.
Yeah, it's faded a bit in the memory of many people, but we seem to have a bit of a Trump base amongst our audience. United is Red says, in general, I consider Donald Trump the best American president. During his reign, the economic situation in America recovered and unemployment levels decreased. Well,
Well, we'll hear what the American audience thinks of that. I think the idea that Donald Trump was the best ever American president is simply fanciful. Ironically, the one who left in total disgrace, Richard Nixon, who was equally as right-wing and Republican as Donald Trump, was actually a far better president than Donald Trump. Jack Kennedy might have been, if they hadn't murdered him for fear of the good things he might have done. But that's just historical, counterfactual speculation, not much point in it when so much is going on in real life. Sorry, go on.
Well, just one more thing about USA from Kevin Hughes, who says that a country where military-grade firearms are easier to access than mental health care is something to be worried about. And then before I go, I just want to quickly read on Julian Shakespeare on the Grenfell video that we shot this weekend, who said that they were cut by the Conservatives. Certain fire station brigades were then left underhanded, plus the fact that the buildings that had cladding that was and told the authorities about the danger to the building.
Well, that's of course true, but the first deregulation of fire precautions and the first privatizations and the first reductions in what turned out to be potentially fatal circumstances, such as happened at Grenfell, were not Tory. They were Labour. They were Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. They were responsible for the first cutting of red tape, as they called it, the first reductions in people's fire safety. And of course, the fire service has indeed been systematically reduced. You can hardly find a fire station now in London because they turn out to be...
They have all turned up to become bourgeois cafes.
Yeah, cafes at the bottom with the big lovely bay doors, but rather nice luxury flats above and behind. These properties have been liquidated in order to be sold. Okay, will that do us for now, Gayatri?
That's it for now. Thank you.
See you when I get home. Thank you very much indeed. Now, I will go take calls now up until 9 o'clock, 08081965522. And in the United States, it's +1 844 944 3344. And it's absolutely free in the United States, in Canada, in the United Kingdom. Shall I take a quick break and then take Nancy in Illinois, Chris, or will I go straight to Illinois? Let's take a quick break, just for my...
You know, and it's a very, thank you for, you know, I'm a big fan of your show, Gigi. Great debate, great. And I'm Scottish. I'm very passionate about what's happening there, you know. I had a great mom. She was Scottish, Mary McLeod. She taught me well. She taught me well at everything, including golf. I love Scotland, and I love the Scottish food. It's great food. I said to Melania, you know, haggis. Look at that. What's more Scottish than that? Me. I am that haggis. She said, what, thin-skinned and full of crap?
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, a good man and a friend of mine, is giving hope to those of us d'un certain âge. The unexpected return under the leadership of Mélenchon, a 70-year-old political veteran, much older than me, who came third in the presidential election just behind Le Pen, has indeed won the first round of the National Assembly elections in France, getting more than 27% of the vote to Macron's 26%. That doesn't mean he's going to be Prime Minister. There'll have to be another election next Sunday. I think it's next Sunday, but it is a stunning achievement, 27% of the vote. And there's still room for some growth, because if you look at what Mélenchon got for the president, and you add up all the communist and Trotskyist and Fabian, so-called French Socialist Party and so on, if they all rallied behind Mélenchon in this next round of the National Assembly election, my good friend could end up as the Prime Minister of France. Some great Super Chat donations. It's really easy. Go to the Super Chat function on YouTube and click. And I'm really grateful a lot of you are doing it. Jason Stewart donated £4.49. He says, the mother of all talk shows is the home of common sense and genuine humanitarians. Thank you, George. Thank you, Jason. And GM donated £50. GM, whoever, wherever you are, I take my hat off to you. Thank you so much. And Mose H donated £5. Thank you very much indeed for that. James Keenan donated £20, saying, keep up the good fight, George. Thanks, James, very much indeed. Let's go indeed to Illinois, where Nancy awaits to talk about Ukraine. Go ahead, Nancy.
Hello, George. I found you through Jackson Hinkle, and I'm so glad I did.
He's wonderful. I love Jackson Hinkle.
Oh, he is. He's fabulous. I mean, I'm 66, and I've been having many strokes for about a decade. So my nerves have been between COVID-19 and the lies, and then this war and its lies. It had me a whole bunch, messed up. And so I found people like Jimmy Dore. Jimmy Dore saved me on the COVID-19 by having Dr. Malone on. And then Jackson through the business with the Ukraine war. I just can't thank those two enough. So, but anyhow, as a 40-year Democrat, I felt guilty in 2016 voting for the Green Party because I just could not bring myself to vote for one of two criminals. Both Hillary and Trump are felons. I mean, that's just the way it is. They both are. They're criminals. They might not have been proved in court, but anybody with half a brain has to know these two have committed crimes. So I'm not crazy about either one of them. So I voted green. And the Democratic friends of mine gave me a lot of guff for that. But now, this year around, and I see my party, I mean, just putting on steroids the total destruction of my country. It's crumbling, and it's crumbling fast. And people just don't, I mean, they're just so busy with the Kardashians and stupid stuff that they just don't see it. And I don't understand. I went to the gas station the other day, and I just about had a meltdown right there in the middle of the pump. I thought nobody in this, none of them, this one guy was smiling, oh, well, it could be worse. I thought, geez.
Well, I don't know how much worse it's going to get. There's a joke going around about the man that was found collapsed on the forecourt, and he told the attendant he'd been robbed. And the lady asked him, did you get a view of who it was that robbed you? And he said it was pump number 4. In England, it will be 10 pounds a gallon by the end of the year, making it impossible for ordinary people to drive to work, never mind drive for leisure. And of course, where you in the United States have had historically far cheaper fuel, you're really feeling it even worse than our people are, though your prices are well short of ours. You did exactly the right thing, Nancy. If I was an American, I would have voted for Dr. Jill Stein also. And I said at the time in 2016, I'm not happy that Donald Trump is president of the United States, but I'm very happy that Hillary Clinton is not. And I would say exactly the same thing today. And I'll say it after Joe Biden versus Donald Trump, if that's what happens in 2022. But the US has got to find a better choice than between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, or Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. A country like yours, with all its can-do, with all its expertise and brains and power, how does it come down to the level of mediocrity of your political class? It's impossible for the rest of us to work that one out. Last word to you, Nance.
I think the problem is television has been brainwashing us for decades. And if the American people want to do something, there's a march in Washington, D.C. on June 18th, this coming Saturday. And it's a movement for the Poor People's Campaign. Code Pink's going to be there. I think the Sunrise Movement and some other movements. But we need to let them see us and hear us.
Absolutely. We'll cover that next weekend. If you're watching in the United States, please, if you can possibly do so, get to that demonstration that Nancy has just flagged up. Thanks for that call. Rod is in Georgia, still in the US. Let's go to him. Rod, what would you like to say?
Well, I just had a brief reminisce back to about 1992, 91, something like that. I was remembering a speech that disappointed me very much. Not that I was never not disappointed by George H.W. Bush, but one that very disappointed me was one night when he came on and he announced to the American public that there would be no peace dividend. It was something that we'd been very excited about when the Soviet Union folded its hand, and the American people were so excited about that and thought that it was, a turning point in history, and that we would start to see the reduction in our spending on arms. And
well,
shortly
look,
after that,
Rod, it was a turning point in history, but it didn't last long. Fukuyama opined that it was the end of history, but history never ends.
Right. And but we all thought that we would see a decline in our defense budget and that we would start to like pay attention to matters at home. And we all had great hope. And I remember shortly after that, Bill Clinton being elected, which I thought was a foul to begin with. But shortly after that, we started bombing Yugoslavia. And I started to see, I saw exactly what was coming with our dismantling of the Soviet bloc and with NATO, and that nothing was going to change. And I see what's happening now. I've seen it coming for a while.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, Rod. This is the turning point. And something is happening right now, and something big. Listen back to Joe Lauria and his interview with me earlier in the show, Rod. It will repay a second listen. Let's go to California, who wouldn't, where Rashid waits to talk about Ukraine. Go ahead, Rashid.
George, I just want to continue on with a theme that Joe Lauria started and you added to, and a couple other of your guests have talked about. And that's it. If you look at the Ukraine story, you know, it's a story that's not 6 months old. It's a story not 8 months old. It's literally a 20, 25-year process that we're looking at. In immediate terms, in the case of the war, as it's the horrific nature of the war as it continues, we need to understand that it wasn't just Ukrainian forces that were attacking the Donbass and attacking breaking the Minsk agreements, but with the full support, knowledge, and training and armament by NATO and the United States.
Yep.
And my point is that supposedly, supposedly the best and brightest minds of NATO, the best and brightest minds in the United States, whether it's the current Biden administration or going all the way back to Obama and before, supposedly these people coming from West Point, these people coming from Sandhurst, these people coming from Harvard and Yale, these, in the case of Mr. Cameron and Mr. Johnson, the public school boys, supposedly we're told constantly the best and brightest are leading us, and it's a total train wreck. It's a total mass destruction. And these clowns don't know how to run economies. They certainly don't know how to run wars. In the case of the United States, multiple wars where the U.S. military has had its derriere handed to it by people in sandals. The absurdity of our budgets, our military budgets, multiple years and the trillions of dollars, and the equipment doesn't work. When will the rest of the population wake up and realize that we're being lied to on a colossal scale, not for the last 3 months, but for the last 5, 6 decades? And then if you want to go back to your reference to Keir Starmer, because talking about anniversaries of the Grenfell Tower, June 8th was the 55th anniversary of the U.S. Liberty attack, where 34 Americans were murdered, premeditatedly murdered, and 171 were injured by the IAF and the Israeli Navy. There are too many complex stories here that are never discussed that we need to bring open to the table. That's the only way a healthy society can move forward.
Well, we're doing what we can, and we're ably assisted by calls of the caliber of that, Rashid. Thank you very much indeed. A brilliant tour de horizon. I think the poll on Donald Trump is closing shortly. It's closed now already. Here's the final result. On Twitter, yes 39, no 61. On YouTube, yes 37, no 63. And on Telegram, still yes 27, no 73. Thousands of people voted in it, and I'm very glad that they did. Let's go to Germany, talk to Karen there. Go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, good evening, George. I'd just like to thank you for your decent coverage of the Paul Mason conspiracy, the expose you gave. You're the only one on the British left that has given a broadcast such as you did that really brought this issue to light. And what's happened since this issue with the Paul Mason conspiracy is Jackson Hinkle has had his pay facilities removed from his internet channel, and Max Blumenthal and Erin Matte have also organised a good response to this Paul Mason thing. Caleb Maupin, Richard Medhurst, and Jimmy Dore, along with yourself. You're the only one in Britain, though, who's had the guts and the decency to address this issue as it should have been addressed. And I would like to commend you on your bravery, truthfulness, and your stand against all the evil and violent warmongers. Your stand for the poor and oppressed is really something to be held in great esteem. And that goes for all the other people I mentioned, Max, Aaron, Jackson, Caleb, Richard, and Jimmy. But they're all operating outside
God bless
Britain.
you, Karen. I'm deeply moved by what you said. I'm proud that my wife and my older children were able to hear it. It's priceless to me, and I thank you sincerely for it. I did give a talk on my one-man show, if you like to call it that, the Galloway show, on last Wednesday night on YouTube. You can see it on YouTube. I won't reprise everything that I said, but I'm hoping very much that the priceless treasure that is Max Blumenthal will be on this show this evening as a late and welcome addition to the agenda. We have made contact with Max, and I understand that he is coming on the show, and we can talk about it directly with him. Thanks, Karen. God bless you always for what you just said. Mike is in South Carolina about January 6th. Let's hear what he thinks. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, George. Good to talk to you again. I want to make a mention of all the callers and guests you have, which are exceptional. I mean, Rod, Nancy, Jim in Tallahassee, where I used to live there in Carolina Lakes, and Joe Lauria with Consortium News. I listened to that and read that organization's newsletter since the beginning of the George Bush years in 2000. And
wow.
But as far as the you and I are close to the same age. I'm a couple of years your senior, but we're close. But when we're talking about the question that you're having about was this an insurrection and was Trump responsible for it, and I'm a little concerned about the results of that, because many people don't seem to believe it was, but in fact it was. Now, did they wait too long to do this? Oh yes, they waited much too long to do this. But if you watch any of that first night of information on all the networks about what's happening there, you can see how the insurrection was going. But Trump absolutely caused it by his absolute determination that the election was stolen. He convinced all of his followers the election was stolen, and he got them riled up and pointed them right at the Capitol. And yes, he did it. It was his fault. And so many of the people that work with him and with Fox News that were having conversations with him at the time will bear out the fact that he was doing it. He was watching it on TV live and didn't stop it when he could. There's just so many things about that. And these people that think that, Trump was the greatest thing since sliced bread, they don't have a clue. I mean, you say that we wouldn't be in Ukraine if Trump was president. Well, we have no assurance of that, because Trump did a lot of things that the deep state wanted him to do, like the killing of the general from Iran, and launching missiles to Syria from ships offshore, where Brian Williams was saying this is such a beautiful display of American weaponry. I mean, if you look at it, there's no evidence at all that Trump would be not involved in this, because the deep state planned and did this Ukrainian thing. If not for them, the Russians would not have invaded Ukraine. I mean, that's just the whole pure facts of it. They would not be in Ukraine if the United States had not pushed this war. And now the United States is determined to put as many weapons as they can in Ukraine and fight to the last drop of Ukrainian blood. Not going to put their people in there, but they're going to make sure that every Ukrainian that's willing to die is going to die.
Very powerful call, Mike, and of course at odds with earlier callers, and that's as it should be. This is not an echo chamber. It intends to be an open university, and it's very, very good that you called and made so powerfully your counter point of view. But for the hour, I would deal seriatim with some of the points that you made. I may, en passant, be able to do so in the final hour of the show. Harry C. Smith donated, I think it's Australian dollars 5. Thank you, Harry. He says the dictionary definition of an insurrection is a rising in open resistance to established authority, a rebellion. That's January 6th exactly. But why is that so bad? Now remember, if you're not watching on YouTube but on one of the many other platforms, you can still donate to the Fighting Fund by going to our website, which is moats.tv, and go to the donate button there. The details are on the web page. I hope that we've got Max Blumenthal in the final hour. We certainly have. My fairly regular and most welcome guest, Andrew Lownie, who actually has provided some of the most watched segments in the history of the mother of all talk shows. He's a historian, but he's a brave historian, one who fights against those who seek to suppress historical knowledge for the preservation of their own interests and their own narratives. So Andrew Lownie and Max Blumenthal, plus more of your calls coming up in the final hour. Let me take a break though.
You have to remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a wish by George Bush for regime change. That's what was driving him. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist in Iraq. So they had to construct some sort of formula, some sort of cover story in order to persuade the British public that intervention in Iraq was right. Now David Kelly, as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, knew that this was untrue. He knew that there were probably no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That was a guy that could have brought down, the whole system.
I reckon you're chaff. You're being thrown up to divert our probing.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that parliamentarian briefing, I think that was an indignity to him.
We saw it on the news, and my very first thought was shock. Oh my God, you know, this man is in the eye of the media hurricane. He should be protected by that at least.
You've got blood on your hands, Prime Minister. Are you going to resign over this?
I don't know the details of how Lord Hutton happened to be selected, but what was certainly the case is that he was the right kind of judge to use from the point of view of Downing Street and the intelligence services as well.
Of the 21 days of hearing, only one half of one day was spent on discussing the forensic aspects. That is disgusting.
We were given the Hutton report the day before it was published, but actually what happened was he went too far.
The events of 2003 were disgraceful ones in this country's history, and it's unfinished business. Those responsible for an illegal war, those responsible for the death of David Kelly, have not been brought to justice. There's been no inquest into David Kelly's death. There needs to be one. We need to make sure that those who behaved in a reprehensible way in 2003 are finally brought to book.
Global higher education with one of the world's best-known iconoclasts. The mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
I hope you'll pick up the film if you haven't seen it yet. You can rent it on Vimeo, you can buy it on Amazon, you can get it from my shop. But best of all is if you come and see me present it in person, which the latest of which I shall be doing is, there it is, in Newcastle on the 27th of this month in the Copthorne Hotel at 7 p.m. What happens is I give an introductory talk, set the scene of this extremely important episode in recent British political history. Then I show the film, and then I take the audience's question and answers in the latter half of the evening. Everyone who's been at one, I think, has found it highly valuable. I think films are best seen collectively rather than individually in any case. But a film like this, which is of such moment, or at least I don't mean to boast about the film, though I'm very proud of it, but the issue is of such moment that it's better if we all come together to watch it and discuss it. So if you're anywhere near Newcastle on the 27th of this month, please join me in the Copthorne Hotel. There are still tickets left available. Now, Andrew Lownie is the author of Stalin's Englishman. That's not me, that's Guy Burgess, whose grave, it appears, like David Kelly's, can no longer be found in the ground of the church where it was laid. At least someone on Twitter was saying the other day that they spent the entire day looking for Guy Burgess. Maybe Andrew knows where he is, but more proximately, Andrew is the historian of the Mountbattens, who featured in an ITV documentary this week, which ran an old quote, but one which is startling in the context of royal families since, including in Buckingham Palace, since, that Lord Mountbatten said of he and his wife, Lady Edwina Mountbatten, that we spent our marriage climbing in and out of other people's beds. You might say that this is a modern royal phenomenon, but then that means you haven't been watching the stories of the Tudors and other monarchs in England, and I dare say elsewhere. We're always lucky when Andrew is able to join us, and he joins us again now. Andrew, thank you very much. I'll come back to Guy Burgess because I'm going to go down to that churchyard and see if I can find Burgess's grave, as people were unable to do so over the last couple of days. But sticking with the Mountbattens first, yes, a group of people went down to try and find it, and they say it's not there. At least it's not findable. Maybe it's overgrown, like much of his life, in weeds and so on, and maybe they just couldn't find it, but they couldn't find it. And I'm going to go down and make a little film of me and Gayatri trying to find it. We'll come back to that, though. You saw, I presume, the latest Mountbatten documentary. What did you make of it?
Which one was this? I'm afraid I haven't. I was away in the States, so I've only just.
Well, in that case, you didn't see it. There was a kind of low-rent documentary, nothing like as serious as your work on the issue, but it nonetheless re-established in the minds of its audience the incredible levels of immorality, promiscuity, dishonesty, very high reaches of the British royal family. It's not just Prince Andrew, he's not a bad apple. Actually, it seems like 3/4 of that barrel have been bad apples.
Well, I mean, there's certainly, I think, two strands. There's the rogue royals, the Andrews, the Duke of Windsors and the Harrys, who in a sense have used their position to line their own pockets and have abandoned their public duties. And then, I think there's still the trope of public service, the Queen, William and Kate and others. So my own feeling is that the monarchy is secure. We have 3 generations, in a sense, in waiting. But clearly, as a writer, the rogue royals are more interesting. And clearly, as they begin to streamline the royal family, these rogue royals will be moved to the sidelines and presumably will be sitting up in Balmoral out of mischief.
Well, you say that, but you mentioned and prayed in aid of that point the Duke of Windsor. The Duke of Windsor's error was to seek to marry an American divorcee, but the next king of England is not only a divorcee, so is the woman to whom he's married, and actually both of them were having an affair inside their marriages with each other. That's very Mountbatten-esque, isn't it?
Well, Mountbatten, I think, was very open about it. The affairs really began with his wife because he was away. He was focused on his career, and as long as she didn't scare the horses, he was happy with these affairs. He then began to have his own affairs separately, not quite as many lovers as she had. But I think as long as both of them were happy and it was all very discreet, I think that the system seemed to work quite well. The children seemed perfectly accepting of the situation. And these were often very long and affectionate relationships. And in some ways, their marriage was stronger as a result of the fact that they had outside lovers. But the Mountbattens, I think, are not unique in the royal family. I think there are plenty of members of the royal family who are busy having affairs on the side, and it's all just kept very quiet.
Yes. Well, it's very avant-garde of you to look at it that way. I wouldn't have put you in for avant-garde status myself, but the continuation of it. I mean, these people are supposed to be role models to the nation, aren't they? If they're climbing in and out of other people's beds, including in the case of Charles and Camilla, they were all friends. I mean, Charles and Diana and Camilla and her then husband, they were all part of the same circle. Aren't we supposed to be looking for exemplars of family values in our leading circles?
Well, I think probably the public are a bit more accepting. I mean, Andrew Parker Bowles, of course, had an affair with Princess Anne before, and Andrew Parker Bowles was known to be a man who enjoyed the company of women. So, you know, it's very difficult for us an outsider to judge. But I'm afraid these things go on. I think I suspect they go on in ordinary people's lives more than one realizes. I think where they're of interest to someone like me as a historian with the Mountbattens is when the private and public lives cross. And we certainly had that with Edwina Mountbatten. Her relationship with Nehru did raise suspicions among the various people of Pakistan, the feeling that he was showing some sort of favoritism to Nehru, and that Pakistan wasn't getting a fair shout. So for us historians, that's of interest. Of course, there's a prurient interest in other people's marriages and lives. But I suspect it goes on much more than people realize.
Well, I hope not, but you may be right.
You're a Calvinist Scot, aren't you?
You're also... no, I'm a Catholic rather than a Calvinist, but I find it extraordinary that we should be so accepting of betrayal and dishonesty and deceit within what is supposed to be the core institution in the land, namely marriage and the family. I'm, as I say, slightly surprised that you're so insouciant about it, but you're absolutely correct.
I've just done Edward VIII, and I think that one of the fascinating things there was to discover that this great myth of the man who married for love was just that, a myth. That he, Wallace had a series of affairs throughout their marriage, beginning in 1937. Even when the surveillance was put on them by George V in 1935, it revealed that she was having an affair with a used car salesman called Guy Trundle, and he was having an affair with an Austrian princess. So you know, I'm afraid that you just have to accept it. It goes on. And then, of course, she had an affair, long affair, with a young bisexual heir to the Woolworths fortune, Jimmy Donahue. It was said that she'd given up her king for a queen.
I'm speechless. Woolworths, all over the sweetie counter at Woolworths. So this is your latest work then, is it, on Simpson and Windsor?
Yes, Traitor King is in fact just came out in paperback a few days ago to mark the 50th anniversary of the death of Edward VIII. And it looks at the period after the abdication. Most books end the story in 1936, but I think the interesting bit is afterwards, and his links with the Nazis, the fact that he was an active intriguer with the Nazis, not some sort of innocent dupe. And so it sort of, I think, gives us a new way of looking at the abdication, that he was, in my argument, maneuvered off the throne because of his dangerous sympathies with the Nazis. Churchill actually threatened him with court-martial in 1940, and he was sent off the Bahamas to keep him out of harm's way. But even then, he was communicating with German agents, saying that he was prepared to come back as a puppet king. So this is the second of my trilogy on royal marriages. The next one will be on the Duke and Duchess of York, and looking at how a couple that is so happily divorced, what the nature of that relationship is. And of course, we'll be looking at...
yeah, you might find it's money, who knows. In my own historical novel, a counterfactual novel, Queen's Way, he does come back as a puppet king, and Wallis becomes the puppet queen, and they're ensconced in Buckingham Palace. I'll not tell you how it all ends. Spoiler alert. But it is extraordinary, isn't it, that our present queen's uncle was a Nazi agent, almost unabashed, unashamed.
Yes, I mean, people were executed for far less than he did. He was communicating with the enemy in code during wartime. There were huge intelligence files on him and on his associates, many of whom were active German agents. And after the war, when German documents were discovered showing the extent of his treachery, there was a concerted effort by Eisenhower and Churchill to destroy these documents, or at least to suppress them. And these documents were basically suppressed from 1945 to 1957, and many destroyed. I think one of the fascinating things is the Royal Archives is now opened, and some of this material is available that people, I think, didn't expect it ever to be available. So we're getting a chance to, in a sense, tell the story of the royals in a more accurate way. Up till now, it's been a very curated story, shaped by tame historians. I welcome the fact that the Royal Archives is opening, and there's going to be more scope for us to tell the story of the past in an accurate way, because I think we're still far too deferential. We still have this Section 37 exemption in the Freedom of Information Act, which means that any reference to the royal family cannot be mentioned. And as I said to you when we spoke before, I've just mounted a 6-year campaign to reveal the letters and diaries, private letters and diaries of the Mountbattens, which were bought with public funds to be open to the public and which were closed. And now 99% of that material, 35,000 pages, have been released, which I think will be very useful for future historians. But the stuff that's held back, the redactions, are again very, very innocent. I mean, nothing in what was released is at all sensitive. But even the stuff they've held back is just casual mentions of the royal family having tea or meeting someone. And I think until we have a slightly more grown-up attitude to official secrecy, and also to protecting the royal family from anything that they maybe not wanted to have revealed, you know, we aren't really a fully formed democracy.
I did say in my introduction that you bravely, heroically fought those that would suppress historical truth for their own selfish interests or for the preservation of their own narratives, and congratulations on that great victory. 99% is a victory in anybody's book. Did you get your costs? Because this all cost you an enormous amount of money.
Yes, it's cost me £370,000. I managed to crowdfund 65,000, but I haven't, and I failed in my costs application. They don't tend to award costs in tribunals, and I think it's just one of those things one has to accept, that the system is not, shall we say, very good dealing with. I was basically operating with a lawyer, junior lawyer, against a team of government solicitors and 2 top QCs. And I'm afraid the judges were often persuaded by in a sense, that firepower. I think one of the worrying things is that the Information Commissioner, which is meant to be the regulator and which decreed that this material should be released, didn't, and to whom the appeal was launched. I didn't bring this, I'm defending it. the Information Commissioner, whose boss, of course, is the Cabinet Office, the people they were actually against, basically pulled their punches and didn't really get involved. But it is shocking that the £2.5 million was spent buying this collection for the nation. They trumpeted this as a huge and important collection just after Churchill's, and yet they then closed it and spent well over £1 million. They refused, of course, to give the costs to make sure that we couldn't see it. I just hope that perhaps Parliament and the media will begin to look at this. I think one of the shocking things for me was that the Cabinet Office were lying to parliamentarians, to my lawyers, and indeed to the media about this. We complain about Boris Johnson complaining to the House, but there were countless statements made by government ministers which were totally untrue.
Government ministers making totally untrue statements. Who'd have thunk it? Now, I've got to ask, none of all the remarkable material that your historical work has revealed, none of it shakes your confidence or your belief in a monarchical system here in Britain?
No, I think I would describe myself as a disillusioned monarchist. I would like the monarchy to behave better, and that's why I like to try and hold them to account. I think it's still the least worst system. There are, as I say, members of the royal family who do a very good job. And I think if the royal family is streamlined, if there's more transparency about the costs of running them, and the bad apples, because I think it is bad apples, it's not everyone, are basically sidelined, I think the monarchy will continue, and it should continue.
Lastly then, can you shed any light on Burgess's grave? Because I'm planning my
Great.
trip.
Well, I will. I haven't seen it for a few years, but it's in fact the grave of his father. It's got a little cross on it. It's just down an embankment about 50 yards from the church. I can't remember on which side. I think it's the south side. It's very sad if it's overgrown, because it was very carefully tended when I last was there a few years ago. His nephews are still
Okay, I'll
alive.
give you a report. You've helped me. I'll seek it out, and if I find it, you'll see it on the show.
That
And
would
we'll
be
make
great.
a little video of it. And if it's needing a bit of upkeep, we will do that and let you know.
Great,
Andrew
thank you.
Lownie, as always, good luck with the paperback edition of the book. I've yet to pick it up, but I will this week. The Traitor King. Who's the publisher?
It's published by Bonnier Publishing, who published my book on the Mountbattens.
I look forward to reading it very much, and maybe
you.
get you back on to question you further on it. Andrew Lownie,
That'd be lovely.
thank
Nice to
you
talk to you.
for joining us. And now we've got another poll running. Should the UK government intervene to help British combatants arrested in Ukraine? Well, for combatants, read mercenaries, for there is no official British combatant in Ukraine, but some mercenaries who went there to kill people for money have been captured, and two of them have now been sentenced to death. Should the UK government intervene? Yes, 26%. No, 74% on Twitter. On YouTube, yes, 23%. No, 77%. And on Telegram, yes, 18%. No, 82%. Super chats to read. Robert P. donated £10. Thank you, Robert. Says, beware Americans. Hitler's first power grab in 1924 ended with him in prison. The beer hall putsch. Trump's first power grab failed too. Hitler came back roaring. Trump may well too. History rhymes. And Kamran Jawed sends £2. Thanks, Kamran. And Dave Solkas sends £5 and says, keep fighting. I will indeed, Dave. Thank you for that. Let's go to some telephone calls. Simon in London on these British POWs, it says here. Simon, go on.
How you doing, George? You okay?
Yeah, good. Nice to hear from you. What do you want to say?
Yeah, well, a few months ago when this war officially began, of course it's been going on since 2014, the bean-headed Liz Truss said she actually supported people to go to Ukraine to fight alongside the Ukrainian army, something that we previously agreed that was totally unlawful and illegal. Well, recently, as you know, there's been a report of 2 British soldiers and a Moroccan national being caught by the Russians and sentenced to death. And I believe just this morning that another former British soldier was killed today, according to some media reports. And the government's official, egregious, pathetic, and downright laughable response to this is that they're talking to the Ukrainian officials, of all people, to negotiate the release, when we all know full well the Ukrainian officials under Zelensky and all his cronies have no experience whatsoever in professional negotiation. These are people who would be more than happy to see these British soldiers executed in the most brutal possible manner so that they can publicize how uncivilized the Russians are and offer crocodile tears of fake sympathy through the mainstream media. And it's the morons equivalent of the sheep inviting wolves for dinner. If anything, our government, our dialogue and negotiation should be directly with Russian diplomats and not with the Ukrainians, who, let's face it, whose negotiations have been abysmal with Russia. You know, they've achieved nothing. But the thing that angers me the most, George, even further, is that why is it the fact that nationalities of individuals who are going to Ukraine are not being revoked in the same manner that nationalities of thousands of British Islamic extremists had their nationalities revoked? I mean, I'm not the kind of guy who likes to shout racism, but why is it when you're a white extreme right-winger who wants to join murderous Nazis? Remember, I'm not saying neo-Nazis here, because these are actual Nazis in the Ukraine. It's absolutely fine, you know. But when you're an equally insane Islamic extremist helping Western governments overthrow, say, the Gaddafis or the Assads of the world, then you're expendable and you lose your nationality. I mean, even more damningly, though, the racism that's laid bare here on the table is just simply unbelievable. I mean, white people can fight alongside extremists abroad, but brown-skinned people who call themselves Muslim can't, you know? And neither of them are brought to justice.
Well, look, I couldn't, Simon, I honestly couldn't put it better than you put it. I'll just add one thing. There are people in prison in Britain, white people, for going to Syria to fight against ISIS alongside the Kurds and the Kurdish Peshmerga, the militias there. They so believed in the Kurdish cause, they went to Syria to fight against ISIS, and when they came back to Britain, they were arrested. Just think about that. Simon, thanks for that great call. Lee is in Sheffield. Go ahead, Lee.
Hello, George. I want to speak with you again. I'll just say before what we're going to say, I bought The Traitor King the other week, and it's absolutely fascinating. But there we go.
I'll buy it too. Andrew's a great writer. Andrew's a great writer.
Yeah, I've been following with interest the increasingly unhinged Paul Mason and what he's been saying. And well, it's not just unhinged, but it's got a very deep and dark undercurrent to it about stifling what is proper debate and proper information. But one encouraging thing I did notice, I think it was Wednesday or Thursday, I first saw the report from the Grey Zone, and I read that, and he got a copy of one of the emails in. And one thing that I did find encouraging was the first 2 lines of one of the emails. It said, this is from Paul Mason, "What I believe what is happening," quoted, "is the emergence of a left anti-imperialist identity. And the danger is it will be attracted because liberalism doesn't know how to counter it." Now, ain't that an admission of defeat that they know the lies is peddled? They will not stand, when people are educated and know what's going on, they would not stand up to any sort of scrutiny whatsoever.
I'm glad you unearthed that nugget. I did too. To me, it was, apart from myself being in Paul's unhinged scribbling graph that he produced, a kind of McCarthyite blacklisting graph. Apart from that, the only other thing I found really of interest in it was that admission that liberals have no answer to an anti-imperialist identity that is emerging in Britain and in Western countries. I was proud as punch, Lee, for that. But let me ask you something. Do you know Paul Mason, do you?
Yes, yeah. I probably first saw him when he was on Newsnight going back. Well, he's going back quite a few years, isn't he, now, when he was on Newsnight?
Yeah. I'm just wondering, because I take a different view to some. We'll see what Max thinks later in the show, Max Blumenthal of the Grey Zone. But some people think, that Mason is, on the payroll of the security services and so on. I don't myself believe that. I believe he genuinely believes all this stuff. He's genuinely gone bonkers. In the sense that
for NATO
he thinks he thinks that NATO is great. He actually thinks it's a socialist idea for America to lead a military alliance, bombing Yugoslavia or invading Libya. Somehow for Paul, that's a socialist thing to do. So however unhinged it is, I think it is sincere. I don't think he's being paid. And the other thing is, those emails to me read like him trying to inveigle the security services in his activities rather than the other way around. He was almost plaintive, almost unrequited love involved. He was, in a way, begging the British intelligence services to trust him and give him a bigger role in this campaign, this crusade that he has launched himself on. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. He's like a Walter Mitty character. And I think one thing that proves it beyond all doubt, I was just looking through on Twitter, and he said something to do with the war in Ukraine, etc. And he had an article that was headlined, whatever his little soldier soul, is it Olaf Scholz, in West German Chancellor?
Yeah.
And it was headlined, Olaf Scholz showing real leadership from the left at NATO. Now, to my mind, I don't know where to begin with that, because it's just so upside down. I just had words fail me.
Well, let's see if Max, indeed, maybe Max can shed some more light on this story. He's coming up after the break. Thanks, Lee, in Sheffield. Joe Burdett donated £4.49. Thanks for that, Joe. Jay Sani donated £20. Thank you very kindly for that. And let me take the last of my breaks for the evening before the great Max Blumenthal joins us.
There is no trick other than hard work, creativity, care, and recognizing that duty is more important than love.
The booming voice of Robert Maxwell, an arrogant man who used his publishing empire to gain him power and influence. But in this shocking account, never told before in this way, George Galloway recalls his first encounter with Maxwell.
It looked like a grizzly bear advancing towards me and punches me with these giant fists, like sides of ham, right in the solar plexus, so hard that I literally bent double.
Then, after George exposed Maxwell as a crook in Parliament, it was war.
Every one of his papers, the Daily Mirror, then following the Sunday Mirror, the Sunday People, the Daily Record, then a few days later the Sunday Mail in Scotland. Even the European, which he then owned. All over Galloway.
Scottish Daily News journalist Ron Mackay was there.
Every night, presumably when he had a drink in him, he would boom over the tannoy about the cretins, the fools. The majority of the workforce believed that he would take it over and their jobs would be secure. But of course he didn't. He just disappeared.
And then
The millionaire newspaper publisher Robert Maxwell is dead.
What really happened? Did Robert Maxwell jump, or was he pushed?
It could be that he went out to, as he did, micturate over the side of the boat. I'm with Ghislaine Maxwell in that I lean towards the murder.
This is Maxwell, the monster.
You said, what is my secret? I will let you and your viewers know what it is. I'm not attached to property. Consequently, losing it or gaining it means nothing to me.
That's on my Patreon channel, of course, patreon.com/George Galloway. More and more people are joining it, and more material that you can only get there is appearing, including my George's Best Football podcast. Episode 3 will come out on Tuesday of this coming week. There's the logo, George's Best Political, I keep saying political, football podcast, although there is not a little politics in football. And last week we talked to Michael Knighton, briefly the owner of Manchester United, and who knows, maybe a part owner of Manchester United in the future when he owned it wholly. It could be afforded by one single businessman in Britain. But now they want £5 billion to buy it. And that's beyond the reach of most, though perhaps not all, of the oligarchy here in Britain. You may say, why swap one oligarch for another? Well, just like on Twitter, I'll be relatively happy to swap the Saudi royal family for Elon Musk. Not least because Elon Musk, with his 97.3 million Twitter followers, seems to be becoming a bit of a buddy of mine on Twitter, and I'd rather he owned it than the Saudi royal family. It's marginal, but I'd rather have Musk than the head choppers. So get onto my Patreon page and you can see, amongst other things, this coming Tuesday, my football podcast. Now, Max Blumenthal, rather like Joe Lauria, is a world-class investigative reporter, journalist, and analyst, and I'm proud to call him a friend, and he joins us now. Max, thank you at this late hour for us, joining us on the mother of all talk shows. You and the Grey Zone, of which you are a part of the leadership, have broken some really fantastic and important stories since you came into being. But few have given British people like me more joy than the revelations about Paul Mason. But for the non-British audience, perhaps you could survey the importance of that story for us.
Well, I'll speak from a personal point of view, and I'm sure that you share this perspective, George. And thanks for having me on to talk about this. Thanks for devoting so much attention to this while the British mainstream press has ignored it in a very disciplined fashion. This is important to me because I know that for years, I and the Grey Zone have been targeted by an intelligence-linked operation that has relied on forward-facing journalists, activists, and cutouts to attack us so that the intelligence services have no fingerprints on this. Or alternately, this cast of characters has sought to enlist the state in the attack on us. And the attack has been designed to discredit us by painting us as some kind of vehicle for Kremlin influence, something artificial, it's not independent, because they can't grapple with our factual reporting and investigative journalism, which is just producing too many stories that are inconvenient to their and disruptive to their agenda. And so now we finally have the proof. Now we finally have cold, hard evidence in the form of emails between Paul Mason and an intelligence contractor who is deeply involved in the Syrian dirty war named Emil Khan, and as we've just realized, someone who is actually inside the Foreign Office, Andy Price, who seems to be sort of functioning as Mason's handler or his main line into the state. Andy Price is the head of the Counter Disinformation and Media Development Unit in the Foreign Office, and he helped guide the British government's propaganda response to the whole Skripal affair. And Mason is creating target lists of leftists, and he's basically targeting the entire Corbynite left. He believes that they're all a channel for Chinese and Russian state influence, and that they are corrupting key constituencies of labor. And he outlines these constituencies as the Muslim community, the young network left, the black community, Scottish nationalists, and so on. And he wants to neutralize the left, working hand in glove with the state while posing as a leftist himself, who is one of the UK's top celebrity journalists and known as a former advisor to Corbyn himself, who Mason is plotting against. So that's why I think this is significant. And it really shows you how the media works in the UK and how much democracy has been corrupted.
Well, perfectly summarized. I can vouch for the fact that he was once not just a leftist, but an ultra-leftist, leagues to the left of me, for example.
Yeah.
I haven't moved an inch in all my life. But he regarded me, when I first knew him, as a backsliding reformist, which was the worst insult you could give someone back in those days. Not a real revolutionary like him. He was a crazed Trotskyist then, with a group called Workers' Power, although it had no workers in it and it had no power. That's what they called themselves. And he's as crazed now, a witch-hunting, blacklisting McCarthyite as he once was a crazed Trotskyite. I'm not sure if we're in psychological territory or political territory here.
Well, these emails paint a picture of someone who's deeply paranoid, who has fallen into a state of vengefulness against anyone who even lightly criticizes him, anyone of any stature who lightly criticizes him on Twitter, and begins to launch campaigns against them and asks the state to investigate them. And that's what happened to us at the Gray Zone. Mason believes that we are at the center of this vast disinformation network, which is secretly controlled by Russia, which is totally false. And he reached out to first Emil Khan, and they began to try to coordinate an anti-Gray Zone summit involving BBC journalists and people from prominent publications in the UK. They were seeking to bring Bellingcat as well into it, Bellingcat being the US and UK state-funded open source investigative journalistic so-called collective, basically a Victims of Gray Zone Memorial Foundation. Anyone who had a vendetta against us, and they composed a mock invite to this summit. And the goal of the summit was going to be to conceive means of convincing the British state to launch some investigation into us. And it was a really harebrained scheme. I don't know what's come of it, but what wound up happening is that we obtained all of these emails showing that Mason is not just some journalist himself. He's someone who at least wants to be an asset of the intelligence services and is communicating closely with Andy Price at the Foreign Office, who has the capacity to deplatform people, to convince social media platforms that he's speaking on behalf of the British government, they should deplatform outlets. So this is a very dangerous scenario. And two things that they proposed, Mason and his intelligence contractor friend Emil Khan, was the relentless deplatforming of the Gray Zone, simply because he doesn't like our opinions, not because we've said anything false. And number two, full nuclear legal, waging a lawfare assault on us to drain us of funds. And we've already experienced a phony SLAPP lawsuit in the United States that we defeated after several years, but this was part of this ongoing strategy targeting us and targeting pretty much anyone who gets in the way of the security services.
Well, look, I mean, all of this is, of course, complementary to you and your colleagues. It is the case that you are the preeminent, though not alone by any means, but the preeminent source of the breaking of stories that challenge and therefore, because they're paper thin, their cases, challenge the narrative of the powerful in your country and in mine. And so they're right to identify you as a target that they should fear. And long may that be so, and more power to your elbow. But let me, because of the hour is late here in the show, ask you a question that I may have the wrong end of the stick on. My reading of the emails was more that Mason was chasing the security services rather than that they were chasing them. That he was seeking to inveigle them in his obsessions, his paranoia, rather than they trying to inveigle him. Have I got that wrong, or is that also your reading?
Based on what I know and what I've seen of his communications with the intelligence services in the Foreign Office, I would say that's a correct reading, generally a correct reading, but he's getting a lot of feedback and there's a lot of consultation taking place, a lot of back and forth, which indicates interest in Mason's schemes. And I think we'll have more on this.
I hope, I was going to ask if you've got more, and I hope that there is. He's now well and truly outed. He's a burnt asset, really, for the security services if they were thinking of taking him on, because anything he says or does henceforth will be viewed through the prism of what we know about him, thanks to you and the Grey Zone. So he joins some discredited, although not discredited enough, McCarthyites from the past. But here's one who's very much not discredited that I want to ask for your view on a comparison with. George Orwell was a very similar kind of person to Paul Mason. George Orwell had almost exactly the same kind of extreme Trotskyite politics in the beginning as Paul Mason. And George Orwell, Eric Blair, as his real name was, used to have lunch with people and then send reports to the British intelligence services about what his own friends had said at lunch, even in their homes, even in his home. He would invite people, friends of his, and then rat on them to the security services. Mason's nothing like as good a writer as George Orwell, no. But he's as good a rat. He's just as good a rat.
Yeah, Mason comes from a long tradition here, and I'm sure you've showed your viewers and listeners the paranoid and McCarthyite mind map that Mason drew up of his targets on the UK left, which goes, starts with the Russian and Chinese state and then ends up with key labor constituencies. George Orwell snitched out Paul Robeson. Paul Mason, in this chart, snitched out the entire British black community. And that should be totally discrediting to his ambitions as a Labour MP, his ambitions to serve in Parliament. He should be protested everywhere he goes. He should be relentlessly grilled about this. And he's called for us to be deplatformed. He's the one who should be relentlessly deplatformed for his scabbing and snitching and collusion, secret collusion with the intelligence services against grassroots groups, against well-meaning people. He's the threat to democracy, not us. He's a greater threat to democracy than anyone in the Russian FSB. And that's the takeaway here. And he has yet to address any of this except to claim that he's just the victim of some kind of Russian hack and dump operation. No, he's not the victim. Everyone who's been around him in the UK left, especially Jeremy Corbyn, who he claimed to represent and speak for before the British media, are his victims. And they need accountability. And finally, huge credit to Kit Clarenberg for pulling these investigations together. Check out all of Kit's work at thegrayzone.com. I mean, there's stunning stuff on UK politics that you won't get anywhere else that really shows you who's pulling the strings here. And we're going to have more in the coming days and weeks.
Brilliant. Well done, Kit Clarenberg. Well done, Max Blumenthal. Well done, The Grey Zone. You have become a national treasure here in the United Kingdom. Thanks for doing so and telling us about it here on the Mother of All Talk Shows. Should the UK government intervene to help British combatants arrested in Ukraine? Yes, 28 on Twitter. No, 72 on Twitter. On YouTube, yes, 21. No, 79. And on Telegram, yes, 14. No, 86. Now, a final list of incredible Super Chat donors tonight. Free, True and Just donated £10, thanks, and says, Godspeed, thank you very much. Toy Chung has donated Hong Kong dollars 78. I've no idea how much that is, but it's a very handsome figure to see on the screen. Thank you, Toy Chung, for that. Corey Buot donated Canadian dollars 15. Thank you, Corey, and says, long live the global south, led by the most vulnerable and the workers. May equity be achieved for all. And Thomas McIntosh donated £8.99 and says, keep up the good work, George, from Glasgow. Thank you, Thomas. God bless Glasgow always. Braithwaite Bone Spurs, Quackerbush the Fourth, what a wonderful name, donated $10 and says, thanks for having Max on. Well, I'm Max's greatest admirer in the Western Hemisphere. He can come on this show anytime. And Dulce Periculum donated £5. Thank you. Very sweet of you. Philip Hall donated £5. Thanks, Phil. And says, strategic betrayals are always rewarded, George. And Lord Charfield donated £4.49 and says, love you, George. Joined the Workers' Party UK. Our First Lord in the Workers' Party of Britain. Thanks, my Lord. And Orang Kiani gives £5. Thank you very much. Let's squeeze in some calls. George is in Dumbarton on the Andrew Lownie interview. Go ahead, George.
Yeah, good evening, George. Yeah, I heard that he was saying that he was going to put a book out about the Duke of York, and I was wondering if anywhere in this book there'll be reference to Lord Porchester, given that he was mentioning there about the cavalier attitude of almost traditional habit of bed hopping amongst the royals, and Lord Porchester had another name, who is a groom or a trainer, I believe, for a present incumbent of the chair, or the throne as they call it. I wonder if you had any views or comments, or will you be able to...
I don't myself know about Lord Porchester, anything about him, but I'm sure that Andrew Lownie does.
Well, if you get an opportunity,
well, just don't libel anybody, Geordie.
No, not at all. It's just that I think his name was Harrington. His street name was Harrington before he became Lord Porchester. It's just resemblance in photographs that you see between the Duke of York and certain other people. There is no resemblance that I see of another chap's involvement in, what would we say, the sirage of this chap.
I see we're treading on eggshells here, George, but thanks for being so gracious about it. I mean, I watch a lot of Netflix history. It is important, you know, to remember how the aristocracy and the royals became the aristocracy and the royals. They became it by murdering people, stealing their land, conquering other challengers for that land and that power. They think nothing, never mind sleeping with somebody else's wife. They think nothing historically of murdering people and their wives. They murdered even their own family, Mary, Queen of Scots. They cut her head off after keeping her in prison for years in Britain. They murdered the princes in the Tower. They murdered uncountable numbers of their own class, never mind of the peasantry in what was feudal society at that time. Mr. Ben, God rest him, used to say, never forget how these people became rich and powerful in the first place. They stole it by force of arms, perfidy, and murder, and then gave themselves fancy titles. All this deference is guff. It's absolute guff. And that goes for the current royal family, not the Queen, but other members of the royal family, including the heir to the throne. Yeah? Last call. It's from Brandon in St. Louis. Go on, Brandon.
Hey, George, thanks for taking my call, and I'm glad I'm last. But I just want to say something. You was talking to the gentleman earlier. I think you're a relic of your country, okay? You know, and I listen to you and I pay attention to you. But I just want to ask you, like, this question from your outlook on, because we are such connected to your country and including Europe. Is America going through something that the European countries have already went through right now?
That's a good question. The hour precludes a proper evaluation of it. I think that the United States long ago transcended its European antecedents. It became an empire, the most powerful empire that there has ever been, but only for a brief period of time. From the collapse of the Soviet Union, whose very existence was an existential threat to American hegemony, to the rise of China and the resurrection of Russia from the ashes of the Soviet Union. In that brief period of not much longer than a decade, the United States was a unipolar hegemon. It literally ruled the world. And that began to rattle down, not just with the rise of China and the emergence of Putin and the renovation of Russia, but on Haifa Street in Baghdad, where by the end of the American occupation, with hundreds of thousands of soldiers, no American soldier could drive down Haifa Street in Baghdad, a very long street, because the Iraqi resistance to the American occupation was so fierce and deadly that long before they stole away from that occupation in the most significant numbers, it was a no-go area. Men in sandals with Kalashnikovs defeated the American empire in Haifa Street, Baghdad, which I have never, ever forgotten. I said that was the last call, but I cannot let the show conclude without hearing from the legend that is Norma in Bristol. Norma, go ahead, bring us to the end of the show.
Hello, George. Just a couple of points. You know Bruce Kent, he died a few days ago. Now, aged 93. And those who don't know about him, he was a very famous peace campaigner who dedicated his life to nuclear weapons, against nuclear weapons. Now, they didn't have anything on the main news channels at all. And, I mean, it's very small-minded, don't you think? Because he was very famous in his way. I think it was just because the other media, they didn't agree with the fact that he didn't agree that nuclear weapons were a deterrent. And I didn't like the fact they weren't, represented.
Well, Monsignor Bruce Kent, as he was once, and plain Bruce Kent, the leader of the CND, was a friend of mine for many decades. I was extremely sad to read of his demise, albeit at the wonderful old age of 93. The fact that not one significant Labour figure had anything to say about his demise speaks volumes about Labour, and the fact that the mass media don't even know who Bruce Kent is or was is equally significant. We will try to properly pay tribute to Bruce's life in subsequent editions of the Moats. I promise you that.
Yeah.
We haven't been able to do it for this week. It's been a packed agenda. Now, lastly, on Tony Blair's knighthood, Norma.
That's right, yeah. Tomorrow, 1 p.m. in Victoria's statue at Windsor Castle Hill, there's a big protest against the Queen giving Tony Blair the knighthood. So I thought I would remind you of that, because we worked so hard to get all these signatures, didn't we, against it? And I just hope...
We did, and we got 1.1 or 1.2 million signatures. And that was one of the biggest petitions since the Chartists back in the 19th century. It was a great achievement. So give me the time again and the venue again.
It's 1 o'clock, Queen Victoria's statue, Castle Hill, Windsor, and it's at... yeah, that's where it is, yeah. Quickly, George, you never got my
Thank
check.
you, Norma.
Okay.
No, you did send a check. I have not yet tracked it down. Gayatri is looking for it, and I promise that we'll look after it and treasure it. Thanks, Norma,
okay,
as
dear.
always, for your call. I'll be back on Wednesday for the Galloway show, only on YouTube. I do hope you'll join me. That's at 10 p.m. UK time, so later for the American audience. Next week, it's our 3-year anniversary. Moats in this current form was first broadcast on the 23rd of June 2019. An incredible 3-year journey. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, join me again next week at the same time, in the same place. Good night.